There is something deeply, quietly wrong with Springfield. You might have noticed it the first time you watched the show as a kid, a flicker of something off. Something that didn't quite sit right, but you probably dismissed it. Because it's a cartoon. Cartoons don't have to make sense. Cartoons follow their own rules. And the rule in Springfield seems to be that things are strange and loud and funny, and that's the end of the conversation. Except it isn't. Because when you start looking at Springfield not as a backdrop for jokes, but as a place that operates according to its own internal logic, when you treat it the way a detective would treat a crime scene and start paying attention to the details, the show drops without comment. The picture that emerges is genuinely unsettling, and the closer you look, the stranger it gets. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the thing that towers over every rooftop in the whole town, casting its shadow across every barbecue and every little league game and every quiet Sunday morning in Springfield. Let's start with the nuclear power plant. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town. It employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population. And it is, by any reasonable standard of measurement, one of the most dangerous and recklessly maintained industrial facilities ever depicted in the history of fiction. A surprise safety inspection conducted within the show's canonical timeline uncovered 342 separate safety violations at the facility. 342. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code to fix the problems that had been allowed to fester and grow and leak for decades was $56 million. And Mr. Burns, a man whose personal wealth is measured in the billions, refused to spend it. Not because he couldn't afford to. He's a billionaire many times over. He refused because fixing the problems would mean acknowledging they existed. And acknowledging they existed would mean someone might start asking questions about what those problems had already done to the town living downwind. The violations themselves are worth dwelling on for a moment, because they're not minor paperwork infractions. They're not the kind of regulatory oversights that get buried in footnotes. The inspection found radioactive waste being dumped directly into the bodies of water that the citizens of Springfield drink from and fish in. Radioactive waste being deposited on children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on somebody's desk. Cooling towers patched with wads of chewing gum rather than actual materials rated for the task. Luminous rats living in the bowels of the facility, scurrying through corridors that glow with something they probably shouldn't. And then there's the one that the show drops so casually it barely registers until you think about it later. Human skeletons in the basement. Actual human remains. In the basement of an operating nuclear power plant, with no explanation. The show shows you the bones and then moves on. Nobody investigates. Nobody asks whose bones they are, or how long they've been there, or what happened to the people they once belonged to. The skeletons are just there, in the background like furniture. And Springfield goes about its day. Now take all of that, the 342 violations, the radioactive dumping, the plutonium paperweights, the glowing rats, the unexplained bones, and consider who is responsible for preventing it. The man whose literal job description is to ensure that none of these things happen. The man standing between Springfield and a radioactive catastrophe that could wipe out everything in a 20-mile radius. That man is Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson, whom the show's own creator has stated has an IQ of 55. Homer Simpson, who in one canonical episode is discovered to have a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, a crayon that has been physically reducing his cognitive function for decades. Homer Simpson, who has been known to sleep at his workstation, eat donuts during active meltdown warnings, and who once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core because he wanted to see if it would get bigger. That is the person standing between Springfield and the end of everything, and he has been standing there, failing at that job, for over 35 years. The first visible sign of what the plant is actually doing to the ecosystem around it appears in Season 2. A fish is pulled from a river near the power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. The fish's name is Blinky, and Blinky becomes, briefly, a moment of national outrage within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as the centerpiece of his campaign against Burns, holding the 3-eyed fish up in front of cameras and audiences as evidence that the wealthiest man in Springfield is poisoning the environment his neighbors depend on for their survival. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to prove it's safe. The town watches. The cameras roll. And then the moment passes and Springfield moves on. Nobody follows up. Nobody tests the water. Nobody asks the question that sits right there at the surface of the whole incident, waiting to be asked: if the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people drinking the same water those fish live in? The answer, it turns out, has been in plain sight since season 8. In the episode called The Springfield Files, Homer encounters something in the woods near town. He describes it as an alien, a glowing, enormous-eyed, seemingly supernatural creature stumbling through the trees. The entire town panics. The FBI gets involved. Actual FBI agents Mulder and Scully arrive to investigate. The episode builds toward its reveal with the kind of dramatic patience that suggests the answer is going to be genuinely surprising. And the answer is Mr. Burns. What Homer saw in the woods was Mr. Burns, walking home from his weekly medical appointment. The treatment Burns undergoes on a weekly basis is so intensive, so saturated with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without the next dose, he dies. The regimen is so extreme that after each session, Burns wanders out of the treatment facility in a dazed, euphoric state, barely capable of navigating the path back to his mansion, stumbling through the forest like something that doesn't belong in the world of the living. He literally glows in the dark, not metaphorically, not as a creative visual choice by the animators. Within the logic of the show, Burns is so saturated with radiation that his body emits visible light. And when the people of Springfield see this glowing figure drifting through the trees, their first instinct is that it must be an extraterrestrial visitor, not radiation poisoning, not the plant that dominates their skyline. An alien? That detail that the town's immediate reaction to a glowing humanoid figure is to assume alien visitation rather than nuclear contamination, is the show telling you something about the depth of Springfield's collective denial. The plant has been there their whole lives. It employs their neighbors. It lights their homes. And when they see its most obvious, visible consequence walking through the forest at night, they look right through the obvious explanation and reach for something from a science fiction movie instead. The Simpsons movie pushed this further. In that film, Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so catastrophic that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determines that the town must be physically sealed under an enormous glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. The dome goes up, Springfield is enclosed, and the United States government's official position becomes that this specific town, this collection of streets and houses and businesses and families, is so fundamentally toxic that it needs to be contained, the way you'd contain a biohazard. Think about what that means within the logic of the show. The federal government looked at Springfield and concluded that the entire population, every resident who had been drinking that water and breathing that air and living in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers, was living inside what amounted to an environmental containment zone. And when the dome goes up, those people are still inside it. They don't get evacuated first. They don't get tested or treated or even warned in any meaningful way. The dome just comes down, and they're sealed in with the source of the contamination that's been damaging them for decades. Now step back and look at the residents themselves. Homer Simpson, massive overbite, bulging, protruding eyes, 4 fingers on each hand, a skull shape that doesn't correspond to any known variant of human anatomy, an IQ so low it falls into the clinical range for cognitive disability, a body capable of absorbing physical punishment that would kill any normal person many times over. He has been shot, electrocuted, thrown from cliffs, struck by multiple cars, caught in explosions, hit by falling objects, and every single time he gets back up. His healing rate is physiologically inexplicable. His pain tolerance is beyond anything a normal human nervous system should be capable of generating. And he has spent the entirety of his adult working life in direct proximity to an active nuclear reactor core. Marge Simpson has the same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers. Her hair grows straight upward in a tower that defies the laws of physics in a way that has never required any product, any structural support, any explanation. Marge worked at the Springfield nuclear power plant herself for a period of time. She was exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same invisible leaking radiation that has been seeping out of those cracked cooling towers for decades. And their children, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, all born in Springfield, all raised on Springfield water, all breathing Springfield air from their first breath to their most recent one. Every single one of them displays physical characteristics that don't occur in normal human populations. Spiky hair that maintains its shape without any product, overbites, bulging eyes, that yellow skin. The yellow skin that covers every single resident of this town and nobody who lives anywhere else. Because here is the detail that makes the whole theory click into place like a key turning in a lock. When celebrities appear in Springfield, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are more normally shaped. Their features more closely approximate actual human anatomy. The show has been quietly drawing outsiders with more realistic proportions than it draws Springfield residents for its entire run. And the standard explanation that it's just the art style? That's just how The Simpsons looks dissolves the moment you hold the two types of characters side by side and notice how deliberately different they are. Within the internal logic of the show's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who don't. The people inside what the EPA has essentially classified as a contamination zone look one way. The people outside it look another way. And the difference isn't subtle. It's drawn right there in every frame. Even the animals are affected. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners. The same proportions that deviate from any real canine anatomy. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. Springfield's wildlife is demonstrably, canonically mutated by the plant's runoff. The show tells you this explicitly. It shows you a 3-eyed fish and draws a direct line between that mutation and the power plant's environmental contamination, and then it asks you to believe that the exact same contamination has had no effect whatsoever on the humans living in the same environment, drinking from the same water sources, and eating from the same ecosystem. Burns knows. The show makes this clear across multiple episodes, across multiple seasons, in ways that the viewer is almost invited to forget between installments. Burns funds private medical research. He has personal physicians whose capabilities appear to far exceed anything available at Springfield General Hospital. He undergoes those weekly treatments that keep him alive through what amounts to carefully managed chronic radiation poisoning. Burns understands the biological effects of radiation better than anyone else in Springfield because he is personally dependent on understanding them. His survival literally requires it, and he has access to a pharmaceutical division capable of synthesizing experimental treatments that don't appear to exist anywhere in mainstream medicine. He knows what radiation does to biological systems because radiation is the reason he's still alive. And he knows what his plant is doing to Springfield because Springfield is, in the coldest possible reading, his laboratory. Homer's continued employment, the endless series of incompetent decisions, the sleeping at the console, the donut in the reactor, the 742 documented errors that never resulted in permanent termination isn't negligence on Burns's part. The show actually gives you the evidence for this interpretation directly. When German investors briefly purchased the plant during one episode, the first thing they did after acquiring it was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the cost of bringing the facility up to code, and the estimate nearly bankrupted them. They almost immediately sold the plant back to Burns. And Burns, upon repurchasing, immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector, someone who actually understood the job, who would catch the violations and report them and demand they be addressed, would shut that plant down within a week. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. And Burns maintains not just his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, but his hold over its economy, its politics, and by extension, its entire population. A population that, after decades of radiation exposure, may be too neurologically compromised to fully understand what's being done to them. The Crayon episode Season 12, Homer Without His Brain, as the fan community sometimes calls it, adds the final piece. Homer has a crayon removed from his skull. His IQ skyrockets into genius territory. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding the world around him with a clarity that has apparently been suppressed his entire adult life. He sees Springfield clearly. He sees his job for what it is. He sees the structure of his situation, and it makes him miserable. He has the crayon put back in. He chooses, consciously, to return to the fog. Because seeing clearly in Springfield is unbearable, and the fog is soft, and the fog is warm, And in the fog, Homer can sit on his couch and drink his beer and love his family without having to understand why everything around him feels slightly wrong. But here's the question the episode opens without answering. How does a crayon end up lodged in a child's brain without anyone noticing? Homer went through his entire childhood in Springfield, his entire adolescence, his entire adult life. He saw doctors, he got checkups, he had medical care provided by Springfield's healthcare establishment. And not one physician in that entire span of decades found a foreign object sitting inside his skull. Either every doctor in Springfield is operating at a level of incompetence so extreme it strains the imagination, which is possible, given what we've seen of Springfield General, or someone knew the crayon was there and chose not to remove it. And if the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised in that way, if the physicians are looking the other way while radiation and physical obstruction erode their patients' neurological function, if Burns's influence has penetrated into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns, then Homer's crayon isn't just a physical injury. It's a metaphor the show is using to tell you something it can't say directly. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains, something that keeps them soft and compliant and incapable of looking up at those cracked cooling towers and asking the most fundamental question a human being can ask. Why are we all like this? The radiation theory doesn't solve one mystery about Springfield. It solves all of them. The characters don't age because their mutated biology has been altered at the cellular level. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's memory function is compromised by chronic neurological damage. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has adapted to radiation exposure in ways that make him nearly indestructible, even as his mind has been devastated by it. Burns stays alive through treatments that would kill a normal human being because he has been actively managing his own radiation exposure for over a century, with resources nobody else in town has access to. And nobody in Springfield questions any of this, because the same invisible contamination that mutated their bodies has spent decades doing something much quieter and much harder to see. It's been working on the part of the brain responsible for asking questions. Springfield isn't a quirky cartoon town. It's a contamination zone. The residents aren't eccentric, they're symptomatic. And the nuclear power plant that dominates their skyline, that provides their electricity, that employs their neighbors and poisons their water and irradiates their children, isn't a background gag. It's the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, it all traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible contamination into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged nervous systems that can't quite figure out why their fish have 3 eyes, and their children have 4 fingers, and the richest man in town glows softly in the dark. The Springfield nuclear power plant isn't just part of the show. In a very real sense, it is the show. Everything else grows out of it. And nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they couldn't. Before we move on, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always interesting to see how many people are watching this from different corners of the world at completely different hours. And if you're enjoying this so far, subscribe, there's a lot more ground to cover tonight. Section 2. Homer's Coma Theory. Let's slow things down a little, because everything we just discussed, the radiation, the contamination, the cracked cooling towers and the 3-eyed fish, and the billionaire who glows, all of it is built on one foundational assumption. The assumption that Springfield is real, that the events of the show are happening, that Homer is actually at work, and Marge is actually at home, and the kids are actually at school, and all of these things are unfolding in a place that, strange as it is, actually exists within the logic of the show's universe. What if that assumption is wrong? What if the entirety of The Simpsons, every episode, every storyline, every guest appearance, every catastrophe and reset and impossible event is happening entirely inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since April 1993? This is the Homer Coma Theory, and it is the single most popular, most extensively debated, and most internally consistent fan theory in the history of the show. Once you understand it, certain things about The Simpsons that seemed like flaws become something else entirely. They start to feel like evidence. Let's go back to the 1st of April 1993, Season 4, Episode 18, an episode called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise is straightforward. It's April Fool's Day. Bart plays a series of increasingly elaborate pranks on Homer. The pranks escalate until Bart takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and puts it inside an industrial paint shaker. The shaker runs for an extended period. The can is vibrated at a frequency that no beverage container was ever designed to withstand. When Homer opens the can, the explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. Homer is lying in his hospital bed, recovering. He's across the room from a vending machine. He tries to get a candy bar. The machine tips over, lands on him, and Homer flatlines. Not metaphorically, not as a cutaway gag. Homer Simpson dies, briefly, and then enters a clinically unconscious state, a real coma that lasts for 7 weeks within the episode's timeline. The episode ends with Homer waking up, apparently. Bart tearfully confesses at his bedside that the whole thing was his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately starts strangling his son. The family laughs. Homer laughs. Everything returns to normal, and the show continues for several more decades as if the event was simply a funny thing that happened one time. But the episode also tells you, in its final moments, that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%, permanently destroyed, never coming back. And Homer's response to being told he has sustained irreversible brain damage is to laugh and then to say, out loud, that he doesn't know why he's laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends, and The Simpsons continues for 30+ more years as if nothing happened. Unless nothing did happen. Unless Homer never woke up at all. The Homer coma theory, originally articulated in its most complete form by a Reddit user posting under the name Hard to Name a Topic, proposes exactly this. Homer did not wake up from his coma in April 1993. Every single episode that has aired since that date, every storyline, every character arc, every impossible adventure, every escalating absurdity is a dream being generated inside the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield, General, slowly losing brain function while his family sits in chairs beside him and waits for him to open his eyes. The evidence is genuinely unsettling when you lay it out. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a different kind of show, grounded in ways that, looking back, are almost hard to recognize. The storylines dealt with recognizable human problems rendered through the lens of satire, but they were fundamentally rooted in the kinds of situations real families actually encounter. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers infidelity. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher who treats her like the intelligent person she is. Bart struggles with his grades and faces the very real possibility of being held back a year. There are episodes about financial stress, about marital tension, about the specific humiliations and small victories that make up ordinary domestic life. The show's emotional core, in those early seasons, is built on relatability. The Simpsons worked because Homer's embarrassments felt true, because Marge's patience felt earned and occasionally brittle, because the kids felt like kids and not like cartoon concepts of kids. After the coma, the show transforms. The shift happens gradually at first, and then with increasing speed. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society. Homer discovers that his mother has been a fugitive radical for decades. Homer meets God twice. He meets celebrities. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds hundreds of different jobs. He survives physical trauma that would kill a platoon of trained soldiers. The escalation is dramatic enough that even casual viewers have noticed it. The internet has been arguing about when The Simpsons went bad, when the show lost its grounding, when it stopped feeling like itself for 20 years. Most people point to somewhere around season 9 or 10 as the turning point, but the coma theory suggests the real answer is more precise. The Simpsons didn't get worse. Homer's brain got worse. The dreams got more elaborate, more disconnected from reality, more governed by the logic of unconscious wish fulfillment rather than the logic of ordinary life. And the escalation tracks exactly with what you'd expect from a brain that's been damaged and is slowly, over years, losing its grip on coherent narrative structure. Now here's the detail that tends to get inside people's heads once they've heard it. 6 months before the coma episode aired, in the season 4 premiere, an episode called Homer the Heretic, Homer has a conversation with God, a real one, face to face. And during that conversation, God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but that it isn't time yet. God tells Homer that his time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The episode is written as a comedic theological exploration of Homer's complicated relationship with faith and church-going. But under the coma theory, it reads entirely differently. God was giving Homer a warning. God was telling him, directly, that his waking life was approaching its end. And 6 months later, exactly as promised, Homer's conscious life stopped. What the show presents as an offhand divine joke becomes, in retrospect, a prophecy delivered with perfect accuracy. The aging problem is the single piece of the puzzle that the coma theory solves more elegantly than any other theory in existence. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years, Lisa has been 8, Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge haven't gained a line on their faces. The show uses what's called a floating timeline, where the present is always the viewer's present and the past reshapes itself to fit, but the characters remain perpetually locked at the ages they were when the series began. Every theory about the show tries to address this somehow. The radiation theory suggests that mutated biology has interfered with the aging process at the cellular level. The traditional explanation is that it's simply an animated television convention. Characters in long-running cartoons don't age. That's just how it works. But the coma theory has the simplest answer, and the most emotionally devastating one. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April of 1993 and never woke up. Of course, the children don't age. Homer's unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he wasn't there to see it happen. Of course, Marge doesn't change the last time Homer saw her before the vending machine fell. She looked exactly like that. His friends don't evolve. His town doesn't transform in any fundamental way. Because the reference material Homer's dreaming brain has access to is frozen at the moment consciousness left him, his memory of his family, his neighborhood, his life, is locked in place at April 1993. And dreams are faithful to memory. They reproduce what the mind holds, with variations and inventions layered on top, but the core image stays the same. Homer's coma dream preserves his world precisely as it was on the day he lost it. Because that's what happens to the mind in a state of unconscious suspension. It keeps the important things the way they were. It doesn't let the children grow up, because the mind doesn't have new information to grow them with. It doesn't age the wife, because the wife in the dream is the wife from the memory. The world holds still. The only things that change are the invented elements, the dream logic, the increasingly surreal adventures that a brain cut off from reality generates when it runs out of real material to simulate. And as the years pass, as Homer's real body lies in that hospital bed, and the doctors make their rounds, and Marge and the kids come to sit with him, the simulation gets stranger. It has to. A brain with access to less and less coherent processing power doesn't generate simpler dreams. It generates more chaotic ones. The logic becomes less stable. The events become more impossible. The world gets more surreal. Homer goes to space. Homer meets God again. Homer travels to foreign countries and becomes a rock star and discovers underground civilizations and all of the rest of it, because a deteriorating brain running a dream for 30-plus years doesn't have the structural integrity to keep the dream grounded. It expands. It gets bigger and weirder and less tethered to anything recognizable as ordinary life. The celebrity appearances fit the theory in a specific and interesting way. Homer's brain, lying in a hospital room, is receiving ambient stimuli from the environment around his body. Television sounds through the wall, conversations at his bedside, radio playing in the corridor, news voices, commercial jingles, passing references to cultural figures. The brain hears these things even in unconscious states. This is established medical knowledge about coma patients that certain types of environmental input can still register. Homer's dreaming mind picks up fragments of names, voices, cultural references, and weaves them into the dream. That's why later seasons flood Springfield with celebrity guest appearances. It isn't that Springfield became a magnet for famous people in the 1990s and 2000s. It's that Homer's brain absorbed fragments of external media through the fog of unconsciousness and translated them into dream characters. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is actually a voice Homer heard through the hospital room ceiling, processed by a dreaming brain that needed to give that voice a face and a place in the narrative. The show itself has acknowledged this theory in ways that are fascinating to watch. In season 34, a fake deleted scene was deliberately leaked, depicting Homer waking up from a long coma and revealing that every outlandish episode since 1993 had been a dream. The scene was fully animated. It was realistic enough that many fans initially believed it was real. The show's creators then revealed that the scene had been planted as a hoax, that it was a piece of fan trolling, not an actual deleted scene from the show. But here's the part worth sitting with. They made it. They animated it. They produced, in full, a version of the coma theory's resolution and then released it into the world as a deliberate act of engagement with the fan community. The show's writers know about the theory. They've thought about it enough to create a visual response to it. And their denial, their insistence that Homer isn't in a coma, that the theory isn't true, came wrapped inside a piece of content that explicitly depicted Homer waking up from a coma. They showed you the answer and then told you it was a joke. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in 2015 in an interview, dismissing it as fan speculation and stating plainly that it isn't true. But what Al Jean didn't address, what he was never pressed on, is any of the specific evidence. He didn't explain why nobody ages. He didn't explain the dramatic tonal shift that begins in the back half of season 4. He didn't explain why God told Homer that his time was coming 6 months before the coma episode aired. He didn't explain why the show has grown progressively more surreal and detached from recognizable human experience with each passing season, following exactly the trajectory you'd expect from a damaged brain that's been running a dream for 3 decades. He just said it isn't true, and the interviewer moved on. The fans didn't move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation of the show's structure has ever managed. It makes the show make sense, all of it, at once. The aging freeze, the tonal transformation, the celebrity flood, the increasingly impossible plots, the reset button that wipes consequences between episodes, the fact that Homer can survive anything, absorb anything, recover from anything because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the author of the story. Here's the part that tends to stay with people long after the conversation is over. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional core of The Simpsons isn't comedy. It's something much quieter than comedy. It's a man's most desperate wish, playing out in an endless loop inside a hospital room. Homer's wish is not complicated. He doesn't want to go to space or meet presidents or join secret societies. He wants his family. That's the entirety of it. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, infuriating, beloved son. He wants Lisa to still play her saxophone in her room, the music drifting through the walls of the house on a Sunday afternoon. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold in one arm. He wants Friday night on the couch to last forever. And in the coma, it does. The dream gives him exactly what he wants. His family, preserved in amber. His children forever young. His wife forever patient. His life forever continuing. Homer's coma isn't a nightmare. It's the only version of heaven that a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the television is always on and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye, because in the dream, goodbye isn't a word that exists. And every time Homer survives something that should have killed him, every time the world resets between episodes, every time the credits roll and Springfield returns to exactly the state it was in before the episode started, it isn't lazy writing. It's Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream stops running, if the simulation finally crashes, then there's only one thing that can happen next. Homer wakes up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children actually are now, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed after all these years, whether the house on Evergreen Terrace is still the way he remembers it, or whether it's changed in ways he can't imagine from inside the dream. Or worse, not waking up at all. That's the coma theory. Every episode since April 1993 is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he can't reach. The show will never confirm it, but the evidence is built into the structure of the show itself, layered into every reset, every impossible adventure, every moment where Springfield forgets what happened last week and starts fresh, exactly like a dream that begins again each night, without memory of the ones that came before. Nobody ages. Reality keeps getting stranger, and Homer always, without exception, finds his way home by the end of the episode. Because in the dream, he never really left. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Let's talk about the summer of 1995. The Simpsons did something that summer that had never been attempted by an animated television show before. It constructed a genuine murder mystery, a who-did-it cliffhanger designed with enough internal complexity and enough deliberately planted misdirection that the show's creators were confident the audience couldn't solve it, and then it invited the entire country to try. Fox promoted the event like a cultural phenomenon. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special called Springfield's Most Wanted that treated the fictional crime as if it were a real unsolved case. The Simpsons wasn't just a TV show that summer. It was a national puzzle, and the prize for solving it was being animated into an actual episode. And then September came, and the answer was revealed, and it turned out that almost nobody had gotten it right. The most popular theory in the Simpsons fan community holds that the official answer that baby Maggie Simpson shot Mr. Burns is not actually the full story, that the evidence doesn't support the verdict as cleanly as the show wants you to believe, that when you go back and look at the clues, something doesn't quite add up, and the more carefully you look, the more you start to wonder whether what Springfield produced in the fall of 1995 wasn't a solution to a mystery, but a cover-up that closed the case without actually solving it. Let's go back to the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. Burns has, by the events of this episode, gone further than he has ever gone before. He's stolen an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget completely. He's driven Moe's Tavern into bankruptcy by manipulating the market in ways that left the bar without a viable business. He's engineered the destruction of the Springfield retirement castle, leaving Grandpa Simpson and his peers without a home. He's injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. He's physically assaulted multiple people. He's used his corporate power to ruin the livelihoods of dozens of Springfield residents. And for his final act, he builds a device, a massive mechanical disc, and uses it to block out the sun over Springfield. Literally. Not metaphorically. Not as a metaphor for his economic dominance, but actually and physically blocking the sun so that every resident in the entire town is forced to buy their electricity from his plant because there is no longer any natural light available for solar power or gardening or the basic biological functions that living organisms depend on sunlight to perform. He fires Smithers, his loyal assistant of decades, when Smithers finally protests. By the end of Part 1, every single person in Springfield has a clear, documented, unambiguous reason to want Burns dead or at least severely incapacitated. The show takes its time establishing this. Homer because Burns has never once in decades of employment managed to remember his name. Bart and Lisa because the school lost its funding. Grandpa because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie because he lost his job when the school's budget collapsed. Tito Puente because Burns eliminated the music program. Moe, because his bar went under. Smithers, freshly fired and reportedly descending into alcoholism for the first time in years. The entire town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. Multiple characters were observed carrying weapons. Burns addressed the crowd with his customary contempt, turned, and walked away. And then someone shot him. Burns collapses. He staggers toward the town sundial and falls against it, his hands landing on two letters carved into its surface. From one angle, those letters read W and S. From Burns's perspective, lying against the dial, they read M and S. The ambulance arrives. The screen cuts to black. America has to wait an entire summer to find out who pulled the trigger. Part 2 arrives in September. The investigation is played as a comedic procedural. Springfield's police department, led by the definitively incompetent Chief Wiggum, stumbles through the evidence. Smithers confesses almost immediately, but his confession falls apart when it emerges that he was blackout drunk at the time of the shooting and actually shot someone else entirely. Old Jasper, in his wooden leg. Not Burns. Wrong victim, wrong location, wrong crime. The suspects are eliminated one by one. Skinner has an alibi. Moe has an alibi. Tito Puente has what is genuinely one of the most memorable alibis in television history. A full musical number explaining that he channeled his rage into creating a samba about how much he hates Burns, performed live for an audience, which means he was provably not in the location where Burns was shot. Then the police find a key piece of evidence. An eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis links it to a Simpson. The evidence points to Homer. His fingerprints are also on the gun. He had the clearest personal motive of anyone in the crowd. Burns had, over the course of many years of employment, never once successfully remembered Homer's name, driving Homer to a breaking point that the show had been building toward for 2 episodes. Homer is arrested. He's about to face conviction. And then Burns wakes up from his coma, his own coma, separate from Homer's, the one he entered after being shot, and identifies the shooter. It was Maggie, baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He tried to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun, which had been in a holster, fell out. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. The mystery was solved. Except it wasn't. Let's start with the contest. Fox ran a national competition for viewers to submit their guesses. The prize was significant. And when all the entries were evaluated, according to the DVD commentary for those episodes, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of entries had guessed Maggie as the shooter. The person who was eventually given the prize was selected randomly from the pool. Because they didn't have the correct answer, they received a cash payment rather than the promised appearance in an episode. The answer that the show had promoted as solvable from the clues in Part 1 was, in practice, essentially unguessable. There was one person who got it right. A single user, posting to a Simpsons newsgroup online on the night the first episode aired. This person had the correct answer within hours of Part 1's broadcast. But they were using a college internet account, and by the time the contest ended and the production team tried to locate them, the account had been deactivated. They literally could not find the one person who solved the mystery. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for that person to identify themselves. As far as anyone in the public record knows, they never came forward. Think about what that means. A mystery that the show's creators promoted as genuinely solvable from the evidence contained in Part 1 produced 0 correct guesses from a national audience of millions. Either the clues were genuinely insufficient, or the answer didn't follow from the evidence as logically as the show claimed, or some combination of both. Now look at the clues themselves with the skepticism they deserve. Burns falls against the sundial. His hands land on the letters W and S, or M and S from his perspective. The show asks you to read this as M for Maggie, S for Simpson. But Burns himself stated, explicitly and on the record within the show's universe, that he did not deliberately position himself on the sundial. He fell. The letters his hands happened to land on were the result of where he happened to collapse, not a conscious attempt to identify his attacker. The single most prominent piece of physical evidence in the entire mystery, the thing the show uses to justify its answer, was described by the victim himself as an accident. Then there's the gun. Burns carried a firearm in a holster. The episode establishes that the holster was observed to be empty before the shooting. Burns's gun was already missing from his person before he was attacked, which means the shooter used Burns's own weapon, which means the shooter didn't bring a gun to the town meeting. They weren't planning to shoot anyone. They encountered Burns's gun by chance and used it impulsively. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. But so does a dozen or more other characters who weren't observed carrying weapons that night. Here's the detail that tends to catch people's attention when they first encounter it. Burns's last words before being shot, the words he said in the moment he recognized the person standing in front of him were, "Oh, it's you." Not, "What are you doing here?" Not, "What do you want?" Not an expression of surprise or alarm, or any of the things a person says when they encounter someone unexpected in a parking lot at night. He said, "Oh, it's you," in the tone of someone greeting a familiar acquaintance. In the tone of recognition and mild surprise, not shock. In the tone of someone who has met this person before and doesn't consider them a threat. Had Mr. Burns ever met Maggie Simpson in any meaningful way prior to this episode? Had they had interactions that would explain the familiarity in his greeting? The show doesn't establish any prior relationship between Burns and Maggie. Burns can barely remember the name of the man who has worked for him for decades. The idea that he would look at a baby, specifically that baby, the infant daughter of his most recent and most problematic employee, and say, "Oh, it's you," in the tone of greeting. A known quantity doesn't align with anything the show has established about Burns's character or his relationship with the Simpson family. Season 18 adds another complication. Homer, in the middle of a completely different episode and with no evident dramatic motivation, simply states out loud that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says it, on camera, to other characters, and nobody reacts. Nobody opens an investigation. Nobody calls Chief Wiggum. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the wealthiest man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line with no consequences. Either Homer is lying for attention, entirely possible, given his demonstrated ability to claim involvement in events he wasn't part of, or he's telling the truth. And if he's telling the truth, then Maggie was blamed for something Homer did. A baby was allowed to carry the official record of having shot a man, while the actual shooter went home, watched television, and ate a sandwich. One of the most compelling alternative theories argues that Marge was the actual shooter. The case is surprisingly well supported. Marge had watched Burns systematically destroy things she cared about. The school her children attended had lost its funding because of Burns. Her family's dog had been injured by Burns. The son had been taken from her children by Burns. And crucially, the show had established in an earlier episode that Burns developed a romantic obsession with Marge, that he was, in whatever twisted way his personality allows for, infatuated with her. Which would explain why Burns woke up from his coma and identified Maggie rather than the person who actually shot him. He protected her. He took the bullet, came back to consciousness, and rather than name the woman he'd been fixated on, he let his eyes wander to the sundial his hands happened to be resting against. He let the initials do the talking. He gave the investigators something to work with that pointed away from Marge, toward the one member of the Simpson family who could be formally identified as the shooter without facing any legal consequences. Chief Wiggum says it himself in the episode. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect resolution to a problem. She was an infant who couldn't deny the accusation, couldn't understand what she was being accused of, and couldn't ever face any meaningful punishment for it. If someone in Springfield wanted to protect the real shooter, blaming Maggie was the cleanest possible solution to a genuinely complicated problem. The final shot of Part 2 shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone else has left. She looks around. She confirms she isn't being observed. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the action of pulling a trigger. The show presents this as confirmation. Maggie did it and she knows it. But it can be read differently. A baby who was present at the scene of a shooting, who watched an adult fire a gun, might later imitate that action the way babies imitate every behavior they observe. She waited until she was alone before making the motion, which could be read as guilt, or could equally be read as the instinct of a child who has learned, already, that mimicking adult behaviors gets her in trouble when adults are watching. Maggie isn't confessing, she might be remembering. The alternate ending makes the show's own uncertainty about this clear. A complete alternate conclusion was animated in which Smithers is the shooter. Full length, fully voiced, fully produced. This ending was displayed during a clip show episode hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses it by saying that ignoring the Simpson DNA evidence would be downright nutty, a reference, not particularly subtle, to the O.J. Simpson trial that was ongoing at the time the episode was written. A trial in which a jury did, in fact, choose to ignore DNA evidence. The show is winking at you. It's telling you that DNA evidence can be set aside, that official verdicts don't always reflect actual events, that the person who gets blamed for something isn't necessarily the person who did it. And in Springfield, where the justice system is administered by Chief Wiggum, and the only FBI involvement in the case was handled by two agents who were pulled from an X-Files parody episode, the idea that the official answer might be the convenient answer rather than the accurate one should probably be taken seriously. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this seriously, apparently because they couldn't find another compelling direction for his character at the time. They planned to send him to prison. The idea was abandoned, but its existence tells you something important. The answer to the mystery was not determined by the clues in Part 1. The clues were written to accommodate whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was constructed in reverse. The solution came first, and then the evidence was arranged around it. Which means that in a very specific sense, the clues in Part 1 cannot definitively point to any particular answer. They were written to be adjustable. They were designed to be read multiple ways to generate maximum confusion and engagement, and then retrofitted with whatever answer the writers had settled on by the time Part 2 went into production. And here's the question nobody seems to ask about the whole event. In a town where every single person has a motive, where dozens of people were observed carrying weapons, where the victim had just stolen the sun from the entire community, how is it possible that only one person acted? Springfield is not, historically, a town that exercises restraint under pressure. Its residents form mobs, with almost no provocation. They riot over trivial misunderstandings. They have, on at least one occasion, burned down their own town hall because of a misunderstanding about a bear. These are not people known for measured, considered responses to outrage. But when Mr. Burns blocks out the sun and threatens the survival of every living thing in the community, only one person fires a weapon. If you believe the official verdict, that person is a baby who happened to find a gun on the ground. The entire population of Springfield, driven to a collective breaking point, produces exactly one act of violence. Either Springfield's population is significantly more restrained than anything the show has ever depicted them as being, or the shooting wasn't as spontaneous as the official story suggests. Maybe someone planned it. Maybe someone with access to Burns's schedule, knowledge of his habits, and enough influence to redirect the investigation toward a target who couldn't be prosecuted, organized what looked like an impulsive act but wasn't. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The writers stand behind it. But the contest nobody won, the clues that Burns himself said were meaningless, the alternate ending that was fully produced, Homer's unexamined confession in season 18, and the final shot of Maggie performing a private reenactment in an empty room, all of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never actually solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those two things are not the same. Section 4. Mr. Burns and the Science of Impossible Immortality. There is a man in Springfield who remembers the Spanish-American War. He remembers it not as something he studied, not as something he read about. He remembers it the way you remember something you lived through, the way memory works when an experience has left a physical impression on the brain. He has told stories about that era, about the turn of the 20th century, about the events of the 19-teens, about the First World War, and the years surrounding it with the specific, textured detail that only comes from having actually been there. His name is Charles Montgomery Burns, and by the most conservative reading of the evidence the show provides, he is somewhere north of 100 years old. By the more liberal reading, he might be approaching 140. And the question of how that's possible, how any human being, mutated or not, can be alive and cognitively functional at that age, is one of the show's most genuinely fascinating and carefully constructed mysteries. Burns doesn't just exist at his improbable age, he functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with an efficiency that, while often ruthless and occasionally criminal, represents a genuine level of sustained cognitive performance. He manipulates municipal politics. He orchestrates long-term schemes that require him to track multiple moving parts across extended time periods. He understands modern technology, modern financial systems, and modern legal frameworks well enough to exploit all three of them. His physical strength is essentially zero. There are recurring gags about his inability to do anything requiring physical effort, but his mind operates with a strategic precision that makes him the most consistently effective person in Springfield. He has been operating at that level for longer than any human being should be capable of maintaining conscious function. The Springfield Files episode, the one we discussed earlier, where Burns's weekly medical treatment causes him to glow in the dark, is the show's most direct engagement with the immortality question. But the implications of what that episode reveals extend much further than the episode itself explores. Burns undergoes a medical regimen that involves radiation, specifically, a weekly treatment so intensive that his body begins to emit visible light afterward. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without the next appointment, he dies. The margin for error is 0. His continued existence is maintained through scheduled, recurring medical intervention with the precision of a mechanical system rather than anything resembling natural biology. His body is being kept alive the way you keep a machine running, through scheduled maintenance, through carefully calibrated inputs and outputs that prevent any single system from catastrophic failure. Burns isn't surviving. He's being operated. And the treatment involves radiation therapy of a kind that doesn't correspond to anything in current medical practice, which makes sense, because Burns's medical needs don't correspond to anything in current medical knowledge. He is, as far as the show's canon allows us to determine, the only human being who has survived to his age while remaining cognitively functional. There's no medical literature that covers this case because there's no other case. There's a famous scene, genuinely one of the most quoted in the entire run of the show, in which Burns visits a doctor for a standard examination. The doctor informs him that he has every disease known to medical science. Every single one. simultaneously. The doctor explains that Burns's diseases exist in a state of perfect equilibrium in his body, each one canceling out all the others. He compares it to the Three Stooges trying to walk through a doorway at the same time none of them can get through, because they're all blocking each other. Burns's diseases are all attempting to kill him at once, and because they're all present simultaneously, they create a biological gridlock that prevents any single illness from progressing to a fatal stage. The doctor concludes that Burns is simultaneously the sickest man in the United States and functionally indestructible, because everything that should kill him is being countered by everything else that should kill him. The show plays this for laughs. It's absurdist comedy. But if you apply the radiation theory and the framework established by the Springfield files, the scene reads very differently. Burns's body is not maintaining this disease equilibrium through any natural biological process. His immune system, at whatever age he is, cannot be doing this on its own. The weekly radiation treatments are doing it. The treatments don't cure his diseases, they manage them. They keep every pathogen, every malignant cell, every systemic failure in a state of suspended stasis, balanced against every other failure, preventing any single condition from gaining dominance and killing him. It's not medicine in any conventional sense. It's nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and his weekly appointments are the equivalent of a trained technician adjusting the control rods to keep the reaction stable and prevent catastrophic meltdown. This reframes everything about Smithers. Waylon Smithers is, on the surface, a deeply loyal and devoted personal assistant whose devotion to Burns has been the subject of extensive fan analysis for decades. But in the context of the immortality theory, Smithers's role is something much more specific than devotion. He manages Burns's schedule. He ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with an attention to detail that borders on clinical obsession. He has demonstrated, across multiple episodes, that his awareness of Burns's medical needs is exhaustive and precise. The show establishes repeatedly that if Smithers were ever removed from his position permanently, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally helpless, though that might also be true. Physically helpless. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns would miss an appointment. The disease equilibrium would begin to destabilize. And within a week, the gridlock would collapse, and every illness in Burns's body would surge forward simultaneously. Smithers isn't devoted to Burns purely out of whatever complicated emotional dynamic exists between them. He's also the person who knows that without his logistical competence, Burns is dead within days. He holds his employer's life in his scheduling calendar. That knowledge, the knowledge that his absence is a death sentence, is part of the foundation of the entire relationship. Burns needs Smithers to survive, and Smithers knows it. Burns's connection to historical events adds another layer to the question of how he's managed to persist across what appears to be well over a century. The show has depicted him with personal memories of events spanning from the early 20th century through the present day. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He served in the Second World War, in a capacity that was, by the show's own account, morally questionable at minimum. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and kept it hidden for decades. He has referenced the Gilded Age as lived experience rather than historical knowledge. His family wealth, the Burns dynasty, predates the Industrial Revolution and extends back through American history in ways the show depicts as both ancient and continuous. The show has portrayed the Burns family tree as one of the oldest and most consistently powerful lineages in American history. They weren't merely wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that shapes infrastructure, that builds institutions and then controls access to them, that exists so far above the mechanisms of legal accountability that the concept of consequence becomes theoretical for them rather than practical. And here's the question that the show never directly addresses. Was Burns always unique? Or has the Burns family always found ways to extend their members' lifespans beyond normal biological limits? If the current Charles Montgomery Burns has survived to his age through artificial means through weekly radiation treatments and managed disease equilibrium and the dedicated logistical support of a personal assistant who is effectively a one-man life support team, is it possible that previous generations of the Burns dynasty employed different methods to achieve similar outcomes? Before nuclear radiation was understood and harnessed, before modern medicine existed, before any of the specific technologies that currently keep Burns alive were developed, did his ancestors use other approaches to the same problem? The show doesn't answer this, but it does establish that the Burns family has maintained continuous control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity, that kind of unbroken generational grip on wealth and power across centuries, doesn't happen through normal succession. It requires either extraordinary luck, which strains credibility even within the logic of a cartoon, or extraordinary measures of some kind that the show alludes to but never fully illuminates. There's also the matter of Burns' specific relationship with death itself. He's come closer to dying than almost any other character in the show, and each time the mechanism of his survival is revealing. He's been shot. He's been hospitalized on multiple occasions. He's collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been left in wilderness conditions that should have ended him. And every time he recovers through infrastructure, through money, through the medical apparatus that his wealth has allowed him to construct and maintain and keep perpetually on standby. Homer survives things because the show needs Homer to survive. It's a cartoon, and the main character doesn't die. Burns survives because he spent a century building a system specifically designed to ensure his survival, regardless of what happens to his physical form. Homer's immortality is passive, a function of narrative convention. Burns's immortality is engineered, the deliberate product of enormous wealth intelligently applied over an extended period to a single goal. Every dollar Burns has accumulated, every institution he's influenced, every politician he's purchased, and every doctor he's retained, and every research program he's funded. All of it serves, at its deepest level, one purpose: keep Burns alive, keep the treatments scheduled, keep the diseases balanced, keep the reactor running. Because if Burns stops, if the treatments miss a week, if Smithers isn't there to ensure the appointment happens, the empire stops. And everything Burns has spent over a century building starts to answer for what it's done to Springfield. The most unsettling aspect of the immortality question is the conclusion it leads you to. Springfield needs Burns. The town's economy is built around the plant. The plant is built around Burns. Burns is built around the treatments. The treatments are built around the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. It's a closed loop, a self-sustaining system where the man, the machine, and the money all feed each other in a cycle that has been running for so long that Springfield has forgotten there was a time before it. The town cannot eliminate Burns because eliminating Burns would mean eliminating the economic foundation of the town itself. Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built finally has to face the question of what it's done to everyone inside it. He is the oldest man in Springfield, the oldest man possibly in America. He is kept alive by treatments that have no equivalent in medical literature, sustained by a fortune that predates the nation, protected by an assistant whose presence is a medical necessity, and surrounded by a population that the contamination from his own plant has made too cognitively compromised to ask why their employer glows softly in the dark and tells stories about events from 100 years ago as if he was personally present for them. Burns isn't immortal. He's something more specific and more troubling than that. He's too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as he keeps the lights on, which, if his treatment schedule holds, will be forever. Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper. Springfield's Architecture of Denial. There are episodes of The Simpsons that fans dislike. There are episodes they find disappointing, or lazy, or out of character, or tonally wrong. And then there is a specific category of episode that fans don't just dislike but actively resent, episodes that feel like a betrayal of something the show had built, a dismantling of established character, a choice so jarring and so apparently pointless that people are still upset about it decades later. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper, falls into that specific category. It aired on the 28th of September, 1997. The backlash was immediate and sustained. 28 years later, it is still cited by fans as one of the worst episodes in the show's entire run, one of the key moments when things went wrong, one of the clearest examples of the show abandoning its respect for continuity and its care for its own characters. But here's what those fans may have gotten backwards. The Principal and the Pauper isn't the moment The Simpsons broke its own rules. It's the moment The Simpsons showed you what its rules actually were, and those rules have been there, quietly operating since the very beginning. Here's what happens in the episode. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger arrives. Nobody recognizes him. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and believed dead in Southeast Asia. He survived his captivity. He escaped. He came home. And what he found when he got back was that someone else had been living as him for the past 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner, the uptight, martinetish, mother-dominated school principal who has been part of Springfield's fabric for the show's entire run, is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a juvenile delinquent from a troubled background with no family and no real prospects. He was drafted, served in the same unit as the real Skinner, and when Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed, when she saw him, that he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never in his life had anyone who needed him to be anything in particular, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He lived inside that borrowed identity for 2 decades. He built a career as a school principal, a relationship with a woman who now knew him as Skinner, a place in the community that was real in every way except the foundational one. And then the actual Seymour Skinner walked through the door and the whole structure came apart. What happens next is the part of the episode that made people so angry. The town holds a meeting. The real Skinner is there. Tamzarian is there. The truth is fully exposed and fully understood by everyone present. Springfield knows that the man who has been their school principal for 20 years is a fraud. And the town votes, not on whether to pursue criminal charges, which might be appropriate given that identity fraud on this scale has numerous legal implications, not on whether to help the real Skinner restore his life. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all, and the vote is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree, an actual judicial order, within the show's universe establishing that the imposter is the real Skinner, permanently, officially, as a matter of legal record. The actual Seymour Skinner, the decorated veteran who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his identity stolen, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And the judge's decree makes it explicitly illegal under penalty of torture to ever speak of the true events again. Fans hated this. Harry Shearer, who provides the voice for Skinner, publicly expressed his displeasure. Critics argued that the episode retroactively destroyed everything meaningful about one of the show's key supporting characters. If Skinner had been Tamzarian all along, then his relationship with his mother, his military service, his complicated dynamic with Bart, his entire personality, all of it was built on a fiction. And a fiction that the show had now explicitly exposed and then doubled down on simultaneously. The episode is consistently ranked among the worst the show has produced. And the argument against it is straightforward. It broke Skinner. It made him less than he was. But the argument misses what the episode is actually doing. The Principal and the Pauper is not the episode that broke The Simpsons. It's the episode that explained The Simpsons. It showed you the mechanism underneath the surface of the show. It made visible something that had been operating quietly in the background of every single episode from the beginning. It named the process. It animated the vote. It let you watch, in real time, the thing that happens between every episode of this show. The thing that nobody in Springfield ever talks about because everyone in Springfield is committed to not talking about it. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable fictions over uncomfortable realities. The town has always collectively agreed to forget, to minimize, to reclassify anything that doesn't fit the approved narrative of what Springfield is. The difference between this episode and every other episode is simply that this one showed you the process explicitly. It showed you the meeting, it showed you the vote, it showed you the judge signing the decree, it showed you the railroad car. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, every other time an event of enormous consequence is simply not mentioned in the following episode, every other time a world-changing development is smoothed over and forgotten by the time the next title card appears, it happens off-screen. Between episodes, in the gap where viewers just assume continuity, The Principal and the Pauper is the single episode in the show's run that lets you watch the forgetting happen in real time. Consider the full scope of what Springfield has needed to forget across the show's history. The town has been physically destroyed and rebuilt. It has been placed under EPA quarantine and sealed beneath a dome by the federal government. It has survived nuclear near misses at the plant. It has experienced events that, in any real community, would permanently alter the social and physical landscape of the place. And by the following episode, every single time, Springfield is exactly the way it was before. Nobody references the disaster, nobody brings up the dome. The town simply resets, and the viewer is expected to accept that reset as a matter of genre convention. Fans call this episodic storytelling. It's a standard feature of long-running American animated comedies, and The Simpsons isn't unique in employing it. But The Principal and the Pauper offers a different explanation. It suggests that Springfield resets not because that's how TV works, but because Springfield chooses to reset, deliberately, collectively, through an unspoken social contract that everyone in town participates in and that operates with the force of social law, and in this episode's case, actual law. The real Seymour Skinner was, in this reading, Springfield's canary in a coal mine. He was a man who showed up with undeniable proof that the official narrative was false, and the town's response wasn't gratitude or justice or even basic acknowledgement. It was to criminalize the truth and exile the person carrying it. The messenger is expelled, the message is made illegal, and life in Springfield goes on, slightly rearranged but structurally identical to what it was before, because that's the only version of life Springfield knows how to sustain. There's a logic to this that goes deeper than cartoon storytelling convenience. Springfield's denial isn't irrational, even if it appears that way from the outside. It's a survival mechanism. If the residents of Springfield fully acknowledged what the power plant has been doing to them, if they genuinely confronted the three-eyed fish, the glowing contamination, the documented dumping, the 342 violations, the human skeletons in the basement, they would have to confront Burns. Confronting Burns would mean disrupting the economic infrastructure that the entire town depends on for its existence. The plant is the town's primary employer and power source. Taking it on means taking on the thing that keeps the lights on and pays the bills. So the town doesn't confront it. It builds an elaborate shared fiction around the power plant, the fiction that it's normal, that everything is fine, that the three-eyed fish is a quirk rather than a symptom, and it maintains that fiction because the alternative is an economic collapse that would be worse in the short term than the slow poisoning. This is recognizable. This is something that happens in real communities, real small towns with a single dominant industry, real places where the major employer is also the major polluter, and the community has learned, over generations, not to look too closely at the trade-off they're making. The Principal and the Pauper isn't depicting something unique to Springfield. It's depicting something that happens in recognizable human communities with disturbing regularity. It's just doing it in cartoon form, with a railroad car and a judicial decree, which is Springfield's preferred method of handling anything difficult. If the coma theory is right, if everything since Season 4 is Homer's dream, then this episode takes on an additional dimension. Homer's unconscious mind invented an entire scenario in which a town votes to legally sustain a lie about someone's identity, in which a fraudulent version of a life is officially declared the real one, in which the people who challenge the fiction are expelled. Homer needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever. He needs to believe that a borrowed identity can become real through collective agreement. Because Homer's coma is itself a borrowed life, a dream life, a fiction that has replaced reality for decades, and as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain its chosen fictions, Homer's own fiction gets to keep running too. The Principal and the Pauper is the most important episode of The Simpsons, not in spite of the fan backlash against it, but almost because of it. The people who hate it, who feel that it broke something, who wish the writers had made a different choice, they're reacting to having the machinery exposed. They're reacting to seeing the thing that makes the show work, laid bare in a single 22-minute episode, without the comfortable layer of cartoon logic to cushion the revelation. Springfield forgets because remembering is too dangerous. The real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere, the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal, riding a railroad car into whatever life remains for him, having committed the crime of arriving with the truth in a place that had already voted to outlaw it. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the smartest person in Springfield. She doesn't speak. She doesn't walk reliably. She communicates primarily through pacifier sounds and the occasional deliberately pointed stare. She is 1 year old, and she has been 1 year old for 36 years. She is, in every visible way, the most helpless member of a family that is not exactly famous for its competence. And she is almost certainly the most capable person in Springfield. Maggie Simpson's silence is the most talked about mystery in a show full of mysteries. Everyone accepts it as a developmental quirk, a cartoon convention, a running gag that the show has maintained because it's amusing and because it preserves the character's blankness for comedic purposes. But when you look at what Maggie actually does across the show's history, not what she says, but what she does, the actions she takes, the problems she solves, the awareness she demonstrates, the silence stops looking like a limitation and starts looking like a choice. A very deliberate, very intelligent choice. Let's start with the shooting, because it's the act most associated with Maggie in the public memory, even though it may be the least revealing thing about her. We've already gone through the "who shot Mr. Burns" question in depth. The evidence is ambiguous. The official verdict is contested. Whether Maggie actually pulled that trigger or whether someone else did and Maggie was a convenient target for the blame, the aftermath tells you something important. A baby was formally identified as the person who shot the wealthiest man in Springfield. The police investigated. The evidence was examined. And the conclusion was that this specific infant committed an act of violence against a grown man, and nothing could be done about it. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Now look at the final shot of the episode. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around slowly, deliberately to confirm she isn't being watched. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. Watch that sequence carefully. She doesn't perform this gesture while other people are present. She waits. She surveys her surroundings. She confirms the room is empty, and then she does the thing. That sequence of behaviors check for observers, confirm privacy, then act requires situational awareness, social awareness, memory of the event being referenced, caution about discovery, and impulse control. Those are not the traits of an ordinary infant. Those are the traits of a person who understands exactly what they're doing and has decided that privacy is strategically important. The Longest Daycare came out in 2012 as a theatrical short film screened before Ice Age Continental Drift. It was nominated for an Academy Award. It is 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson operating at a cognitive level that would be remarkable in a trained adult, let alone in a baby who can't reliably remain upright while walking. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare run with the kind of authoritarian efficiency that the episode uses for comedy but that also serves as a genuine obstacle. Inside the facility, Maggie finds a caterpillar that's about to become a butterfly. Another infant, a bully named Gerald, wants to destroy it. Maggie wants to protect it and eventually release it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers not just Gerald but the daycare's entire infrastructure, its staff, its monitoring systems, its physical layout to get the caterpillar safely out of the building. She does all of this without speaking a single word. She does it through observation, through planning, through improvised problem solving when her initial approaches don't work, through the ability to predict how the adults around her will behave and use that prediction to route around them. She identifies threats before they materialize. She develops multi-step plans that require timing, spatial awareness, and an understanding of other people's motivations. She executes those plans correctly, and she does all of this while her physical capabilities are those of a 1-year-old. She falls, she stumbles, she crawls when she needs to run. Her body is a constant limitation that her mind has to work around, but she works around it. Every limitation her physical development imposes on her, her cognitive capacity compensates for. She is operating at a level that her body cannot fully support, and she succeeds anyway because the gap is bridged by intelligence. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly on more than one occasion. The results depend on which episode you're in, but the implication across all of them is consistent. Whatever is happening in Maggie's brain is not what's happening in the brain of a normal 1-year-old. Some episodes place her intelligence in the genius range. Some imply that standard tests can't measure what she possesses because the tests aren't designed for the level she's operating at. The show treats these moments as quick gags and moves on. But the pattern is clear. And then there's the silence. Maggie's first and so far essentially only word was "Daddy," spoken in a cameo by Elizabeth Taylor in what amounted to a very special moment in Season 3. It happened once, has never been elaborated on in any meaningful way, and Maggie has spent the subsequent 3+ decades communicating in ways that don't involve language. She is surrounded by possibly the most verbally active family on American television. Homer never stops talking. Marge never stops worrying out loud. Bart never stops provoking and commenting and arguing. Lisa never stops explaining, analyzing, lecturing, questioning. The Simpson household is a wall of constant verbal noise from every direction. And in the middle of all of it, Maggie sits quietly, watching, listening, taking everything in with those enormous eyes, and making decisions in a mind that nobody seems to fully understand. The theory, the one that seems to fit the evidence most completely, is that Maggie's silence isn't developmental delay. She doesn't lack the capacity for language. She has made a strategic decision not to use it. And the reason for that decision is visible in the life of her older sister. Look at what happens to Lisa Simpson. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa is a genuine genius, with an IQ that dwarfs everyone else in her household and most of the adults in Springfield. Lisa uses her intelligence visibly, vocally, constantly. She speaks up, she challenges authority, she identifies problems and tries to address them. She asks the questions nobody else is asking. She tries to make things better. And what does this get her? Isolation, mockery, frustration. She is consistently overlooked by the people closest to her, repeatedly dismissed by her community, perpetually undervalued by a social environment that doesn't know what to do with a child who is smarter than the adults around her. Lisa's intelligence is her greatest gift and simultaneously the source of most of her suffering because she wears it on the outside. She announces it. She can't not announce it because that's how Lisa engages with the world. Maggie has watched this happen since the day she was born. She has observed, with the full attentiveness of a mind that misses essentially nothing, what happens to the smartest person in the family when she tries to use her intelligence openly. She has watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive resistance. She has watched the most capable person in the household be consistently sidelined by a community that doesn't know what to do with capability. And Maggie learned something. She learned the lesson that is the exact opposite of the one Lisa learned. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. Think about every moment where Maggie does something remarkable. Every act of intelligence, every display of capability, every situation where her intervention saves the day or protects someone she cares about. What happens next? Nothing. The family doesn't notice. The community doesn't notice. Burns was shot, and the investigation focused on every adult in Springfield before it reluctantly landed on the baby, because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded precisely because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act, every display of extraordinary cognition, happens below the threshold of adult attention. It happens in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is watching carefully enough to see it, and Maggie has ensured that nobody watches carefully enough by maintaining the most effective possible disguise. She performs exactly what everyone expects from a baby. Quiet, passive, apparently helpless, apparently dependent, apparently limited to the functions and awareness of a standard 1-year-old. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. She is the most capable member of the Simpson family, and she has spent 36 years making sure that nobody realizes it until she decides they should. Now apply the radiation theory to this. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations express differently in different individuals based on genetics or age of exposure or some other variable, then Maggie and Homer represent the two extreme ends of a spectrum. Homer's mutation reduced his cognitive function to a level that qualifies as clinical disability. Maggie's mutation did the opposite. It amplified something that was already there, took a natural capacity and pushed it far beyond what would be expected in any normal developmental trajectory. Same environment, same family, same water, same air, same proximity to the cracked cooling towers. But where the radiation took something from Homer's brain, it gave something to Maggie's. He is what happens when mutation diminishes a mind. She is what happens when mutation expands one beyond its expected boundaries. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same coin. And Burns, sitting at the center of the system that produced both of them, benefits from Homer's diminishment while remaining entirely unaware of Maggie's expansion. Which may be, in the long run, a more significant oversight than any of the plant's documented safety violations. The coma theory adds another dimension that tends to stay with people once they've heard it. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since 1993 is the product of an unconscious father's desperate attempt to stay connected to his family, then Maggie's brilliance in the dream represents something specific, Homer can't see her grow up. He can't watch her develop, can't hear her speak in full sentences, can't learn what kind of person she becomes. He has no reference material for Maggie at any age beyond the baby she was when he lost consciousness. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her physical limitations. He makes her capable of things that no one-year-old could actually accomplish. He makes her someone who, even in the absence of a father who's present and conscious and available, will be fine. More than fine. Maggie's genius, in this reading, isn't a mutation. It's a father's hope, made manifest in a dream. It's Homer Simpson's deepest wish for his youngest child, the one he can't reach and can't protect and can't watch over, expressed in the only way available to him, by imagining her as someone who doesn't need protection. But outside the dream, and whatever version of Springfield is real, if any version of Springfield is real, the darker reading is still there. Maggie doesn't speak because she's learned that speaking gets you nothing in this town. She doesn't reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished in Springfield. She watches everything. She remembers everything. She understands everything. And she waits. For what? The show never tells us. Maggie's endgame is the last truly unsolved mystery in the Simpson family. She is the only main character whose future remains genuinely open. The show has imagined futures for everyone else in the family. But Maggie's potential, the full scope of what she's capable of, has never been revealed. We've seen glimpses. We've seen her shoot a man. We've seen her command a room full of infants. We've seen her confirm or deny the guilt of people twice her size with a single controlled gesture. And the family trusts her judgment implicitly, almost instinctively, in ways they probably couldn't explain if pressed. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She cannot walk without falling. She cannot speak in any meaningful way. And she is, without question, the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She just hasn't decided what to do with that yet. And maybe that's the part that sits with you. Not what she's done, what she's waiting to do. Behind that pacifier, behind those enormous dark eyes, behind 36 years of calibrated silence, something is thinking. Something is planning. Something is watching the family and the town and the world with an intelligence that nobody suspects and nobody has the capacity to contain. And when Maggie finally decides to act, when she finally breaks the silence she's been building for 3 decades and reveals what's been accumulating behind that blank baby stare, Springfield will not see it coming, because that's exactly how Maggie designed it. Section 7. The Simpsons Predictions Phenomenon. Let's talk about something that has, in the past decade, made The Simpsons more famous and more discussed than it was during any single point in its original run. The predictions. The idea that this cartoon, this animated sitcom that began in 1989 and was conceived primarily as a satirical portrait of the American working-class family, has been accurately forecasting world events for over 3 decades with a consistency that strains coincidence. You've seen the screenshots. You've probably shared a few of them. The Trump presidency, depicted in the year 2000, the smartwatch, imagined in 1995, the Disney acquisition of Fox, joked about in 1998, which actually happened in 2019. The flu pandemic from Asia, depicted in 1993, the Higgs boson mass, apparently approximated by a formula on a chalkboard in 1998, 14 years before physicists confirmed the particle experimentally. The list goes on. It goes on long enough that it has become its own genre of internet content, its own recurring news cycle every time something happens in the world, and someone finds an episode from 1994 that seems to have anticipated it. And the question everyone asks is the same. How are they doing this? Are the writers time travelers? Is there a hidden code embedded in the show? Is The Simpsons somehow operating as a prophetic text, disguised as a Sunday night comedy? The official answer, from the people who actually make the show, is considerably less exciting. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on The Simpsons for most of its run, addressed the prediction phenomenon directly and bluntly. His explanation was essentially this: if you throw enough darts at a board for long enough, some of them are going to hit the bullseye. Not because you're particularly skilled, because math. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, satirical observations, speculative gags, and imaginative leaps. When you generate that volume of content over that span of time, some portion of it is going to align with future events through sheer statistical probability. The show has made thousands of guesses about where American culture and technology and politics were heading. Some of those guesses were wrong. Some of them were right. The ones that were right get screenshotted and shared. The ones that were wrong get forgotten. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak seasons in the 1990s, put it even more plainly. The predictions, he said, aren't really predictions. They're coincidences amplified by the show's age and by the cyclical nature of history. The episodes are old. History repeats itself. When you have 3 decades of satirical content about America, you're going to find things that rhyme with whatever is currently happening, because America tends to rhyme with itself. Fact-checking organizations have gone through the most famous prediction claims systematically and found that many of them are more ambiguous than they appear in the screenshots. The Trump prediction didn't involve a detailed portrayal of any specific policy or event. It used Trump's name as shorthand for absurd celebrity presidency, a joke that had a much wider possible range of ways to manifest and happened to manifest in one specific way. The Disney-Fox prediction was drawn from observing that media consolidation was an accelerating trend and extrapolating it to its logical conclusion. Lots of people were making that same observation in the late 1990s. The Simpsons happened to make it in an animated format that was saved and cataloged and is now searchable. The smartwatch depiction was an extrapolation from the existing direction of technology miniaturization. Again, lots of people saw that coming. The Simpsons drew a picture of it. And many of the predictions involve technologies and cultural developments that were already visible in prototype or early-stage form when the episodes were written. The Simpsons writing staff, it's worth emphasizing, has historically been one of the most academically credentialed in television. Multiple writers have degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other elite institutions. Several have advanced backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, political theory, and the physical sciences. These are not people pulling random guesses out of nowhere. They are highly educated, widely read observers of American culture whose job is to study trends and push them to their absurd but logical endpoints. They're not predicting the future. They're reading the present more carefully than most people do, and then imagining where it leads. That explanation covers most of the cases, but it doesn't cover all of them, and the cases it doesn't cover are interesting. Some of the coincidences are specific in ways that statistical probability has a harder time accounting for. The Trump episode didn't just forecast a celebrity president. It named Trump specifically in 2000, when Trump had been publicly discussing a potential presidential run since the late 1980s, but was still considered a long-shot joke candidate. It depicted a specific visual of Trump descending an escalator that echoes the actual escalator announcement Trump made in 2015, although this particular parallel is contested in terms of how closely the two images actually match. The Siegfried and Roy episode from 1993 didn't just joke about dangerous exotic animals. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a way that closely parallels the actual event that occurred in 2003, when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. That's a specific detail, not a vague trend extrapolation. The 1993 flu episode, depicting a virus from Asia causing mass panic and supply chain collapse and frantic searches for treatment, aired 27 years before COVID-19. The episode also includes a moment where the panicked townspeople accidentally release a swarm of insects, which felt bizarrely resonant when murder hornets appeared in American news coverage during the early months of the actual 2020 pandemic. And then there's the Cypress Hill and London Symphony Orchestra situation, which is perhaps the strangest one of all. In a 1996 episode, a joke hinges on the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra while under the influence. That specific collaboration, Cypress Hill performing with the London Symphony Orchestra, actually happened in 2024 at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years after the joke first appeared on television. So the dart-throwing explanation works for most of this, and doesn't quite work for some of it, which is where the genuinely interesting theory enters. The Simpsons, in this reading, doesn't predict the future, it shapes it. The show is one of the most watched, most quoted, most culturally embedded pieces of media in American history. It has been running longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have entered the American cultural lexicon in ways that go far beyond normal television influence. Its jokes have become reference points that people carry around without always knowing where they came from. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference. It becomes something that appears in political satire and late-night television and social media commentary for years afterward. It makes the idea of a Trump presidency feel not possible exactly, but familiar. It takes an absurd scenario and renders it imaginable. And when the absurd scenario actually happens, the cultural response isn't pure shock. Part of the response is recognition. Oh, this is the thing The Simpsons did. We've seen this before. The show doesn't predict the future. It normalizes the future. It takes trajectories that are already in motion and presents them as accomplished facts, and then when those facts arrive, the audience experiences something that feels like prophecy but is actually the result of cultural priming. We've been prepared to recognize this when it happens, because we've already been shown a version of it. When Disney bought Fox, the cultural response wasn't exclusively, "This is shocking and unprecedented." Part of it was, of course they did. The Simpsons already showed us this. The show's satire had made the consolidation feel inevitable, like the next logical step in a sequence that had already been narrated, and when it happened, it confirmed a narrative that the show had already established. Springfield doesn't reflect America. At this point, after 36 years, it might be more accurate to say that America has gradually come to resemble Springfield. The show held up a mirror for decades, and the audience stared into it for so long that the reflection and the viewer started to converge. The nuclear power plant run by a corrupt billionaire, while the safety inspector sleeps at his desk. The municipal government that exists primarily to inconvenience the people it's supposed to serve. The community that riots over minor provocations while sleepwalking through actual catastrophes. The endless cycle of disaster and reset, in which nothing ever really changes and the same mistakes repeat across generations because the system is built to ensure they do. Springfield isn't a prediction of where America was heading. It's a portrait of where America already was, rendered with enough exaggeration to make the contours visible. And here's the final piece that makes the whole phenomenon genuinely worth thinking about. The Simpsons has made an enormous number of jokes that didn't come true. Predictions about technology that never materialized. Satirical observations about political trajectories that went in different directions. Cultural commentary that missed its mark entirely. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds viral posts around The Simpsons' predictions that failed. Confirmation bias, the cognitive tendency to notice and remember information that supports an existing pattern while filtering out information that contradicts it, operates entirely in one direction. We see the hits and forget the misses. And when you apply that filter to 800 episodes of satirical content, when you run the entire archive through a sieve that only allows accurate predictions through, you end up with a highlight reel that looks from the outside like prophecy. The predictions aren't supernatural. They're the natural output of a show that has been running for an impossibly long time, staffed by intelligent, well-read observers of American culture, generating more satirical content than any other show in television history, and then having that content filtered through one of the most powerful confirmation bias engines ever created, the internet's archive and the human tendency to share the remarkable. The Simpsons wrote enough possible futures that some of them were bound to arrive. And the ones that arrived are the only ones anyone remembers. But knowing how the trick works doesn't make it any less interesting to watch. 800 episodes, 36 years, thousands of observations about where America might be going. And enough of them have turned out to be right that even the show's own creators, when pressed, admit to occasionally pausing when a new comparison surfaces and wondering if maybe, just maybe, they've been picking up on something they don't fully understand. Section 8. Mona Simpson and the Three-Generation Conspiracy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the established fact. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told him at some point during Homer's childhood that his mother had passed away. Abe showed him a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up carrying the specific kind of loss that comes with a mother who died when you were young, the absence that never quite fills in, the negative space where something should be and isn't. And that loss shaped everything about Homer Simpson. His desperate need to be liked by the people around him, his terror of abandonment, his compulsive clinginess toward Marge, his willingness to absorb humiliation and contempt from his employer without complaint, decade after decade. Because the alternative, losing the one stable structure he's built, is worse than any indignity. His inability to be alone with himself in any meaningful way without something going sideways. Homer's entire personality, all of its most distinctive and most painful features, is a coping mechanism built around the absence of a mother who died. Except she didn't die. Season 7, Episode 7. Mother Simpson. Aired the 19th of November, 1995. The episode begins with Homer faking his own death to avoid working on a Saturday, a typically Homer-esque plan that gets out of hand in ways he didn't anticipate. When Marge insists he correct the official record, Homer visits the Hall of Records, and there he discovers that according to municipal records, his mother is alive. The grave Abe showed him belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been using a famous American author's headstone as a prop to sustain a lie for the entirety of Homer's life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave, not knowing, somehow, that Homer is still alive. They recognize each other. They have a reunion that is one of the most genuine, most unguarded emotional scenes in the show's entire history. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, meeting beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells Homer why she left. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was, at that point, a housewife married to Abe with a young son named Homer. She was living an ordinary life in Springfield while the world outside was burning through the civil rights movement and the counterculture and the mounting anger over Vietnam. And then something changed for her. She became, as the show puts it, radicalized. She joined a group of activists who had identified a target that, in the context of the show, feels almost unbelievably significant. Mr. Burns owned a biological weapons laboratory in Springfield, a facility designed to produce weaponized pathogens, situated in the same town where Homer was growing up, where children were playing, where families were conducting their ordinary lives in complete ignorance of what was being cooked in a lab down the road by the richest man in town. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory and detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agents stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would eventually become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded. The weapons were destroyed. But as the group fled, Mona stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That person was Mr. Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just neutralized, and Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI, and from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive. She couldn't go home. She couldn't contact her family. She couldn't hold her son or tell him why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the underground, where she would remain for the next 27 years. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead, and Homer spent 3 decades believing he was the kind of son whose mother preferred death to raising him, believing there was something fundamentally broken about him that caused the people who were supposed to stay to leave instead. Now consider what Burns did with that belief. Burns didn't just identify Mona to the FBI and call it a day. He actively pursued her. He held a personal grudge for decades against a woman who had destroyed his weapons program and then had the audacity to help him up from the floor while doing it. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her within a short time of her arrival. He recognizes her. He calls the authorities. The FBI shows up at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother a second time. This time knowing why she left. This time knowing who forced her out. This time knowing that the man who signs his paychecks and can never remember his name is the same man who reached into his childhood and pulled his mother out of it. And Homer doesn't connect the dots. He knows. The information is right there in front of him. But he doesn't fully process what it means. He doesn't quit. He doesn't confront Burns. He goes back to work in Sector 7G, where he has worked his entire adult life, for the man who stole the most important thing in his life when he was 6 years old. This is played in the show as tragedy rather than comedy. And it's earned tragedy, because Homer's inability to make this connection isn't stupidity in the simple cartoon sense. It's the kind of cognitive deficit that comes from decades of radiation exposure, and a crayon in the brain, and a childhood shaped by grief, and the specific damage that prolonged maternal absence inflicts on developing minds. Burns didn't just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally stunted in the precise ways that make him the perfect employee for a facility like the power plant. Desperate for approval, incapable of challenging authority, terrified, at some deep level he probably can't articulate, of being abandoned by the structures that give his life shape. He will not rock the boat, he will not ask questions. He will absorb any indignity and return to work the next morning, because the alternative, losing the job, losing the structure, losing the only consistent thing in his adult life, feels more threatening than anything the job can do to him. The show confirms this conspiracy in a later episode that reveals the specific mechanism of Homer's employment security. Burns had committed some undisclosed crime. Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a job at the plant, permanent and irrevocable, no matter how many mistakes Homer made. No matter how many documented errors accumulated in his file, and the show suggests the number eventually exceeded 700, no matter how many times a rational employer would have terminated him without hesitation, Homer's job security wasn't a cartoon convenience or an employment miracle. It was a contractual obligation, brokered in secret between his father and his mother's pursuer, and never explained to Homer because explaining it would require explaining everything else. Would require admitting that his grandfather made a deal with the devil, that his father lied about his mother's death for 27 years, that the man whose name he writes on his tax forms destroyed his family before Homer was old enough to know what a family was supposed to look like. 3 generations of one family, broken by a single man's grudge. And Homer stands at the center of it, too damaged by that same man's contamination to fully see the architecture of his own suffering. Working in the plant that poisons his town, cashing checks from the man who stole his childhood, going home each evening to a house that runs on electricity generated by the same facility that funds the empire of the man who took his mother. Mona died in a later season. The scene is quiet and unadorned in a way that feels unusual for the show. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew leave for the last time. No joke cushions the moment. No comic beat provides relief. Just a man and his mother and the weight of 27 years of stolen time, pressing down on the small hospital room in a town that was responsible for all of it. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the jokes and the gags and the 3+ decades of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was systematically damaged by one man's power and one community's inability to resist it. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the enemy and buried the truth for decades. Homer inherited the consequences without ever understanding why his life felt, at some level below consciousness, like something had been taken from it. And Burns won. Burns always wins. Because in Springfield, the man with the resources writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant until he no longer can. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a specific kind of broken man in Sector 7G. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The town that exists everywhere and nowhere. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people could identify Springfield on a map of fictional America than could identify the capital of half the states in the actual country. They know the nuclear plant. They know the gorge. They know the tire fire that has been burning for decades. They know the elementary school and the hospital and the Quick E-Mart and Moe's Tavern. They can draw the layout of the Simpson house from memory, and they have absolutely no idea where any of it is. Springfield's geographic location is the show's longest-running, most deliberately maintained, most elaborately constructed mystery. The show has been contradicting itself about where Springfield is for its entire run, and the contradictions aren't accidental. They're architectural. They're built into the show's DNA as intentionally as any of its characters. And when you understand why the show has gone to such extraordinary lengths to ensure Springfield can never be located on a real map, the mystery becomes one of the most revealing things about the show's deeper intentions. Let's start with what the show tells us about Springfield's geography. Springfield has a nuclear power plant, which requires certain infrastructure. It has a gorge, a harbor, mountains, an ocean that is apparently reachable within a reasonable drive, a desert that is similarly accessible, farmland, forests, a tire fire of impressive longevity, and apparently enough varied terrain in its immediate vicinity to accommodate plots involving jungle survival, Arctic conditions, and subtropical heat waves. It borders, depending on which episode you're watching, the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky. It has mountains to the north and coastline to somewhere in the south, and the Midwest to one side, and what appears to be the Canadian border not impossibly far to the north in certain establishing shots. Springfield's telephone area code has been shown as 636, which is a real code assigned to Missouri. Its state abbreviation has been shown as NT, which doesn't correspond to any real American state. When Homer once called what was described as the state capital, the voice on the other end indicated the state started with a vowel, which narrows things somewhat without actually locating anything. In one episode, Springfield is identifiably in the north. In another, it's clearly in the south. In Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary episode from the 12th season, Springfield's location is actually named, but the named location differs between the original broadcast version and the syndicated rerun version, meaning the show literally changed the answer depending on which version of the episode you were watching. Matt Groening, the show's creator, addressed the mystery in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up near. He said he chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, and because he liked the idea of it being ambiguous. For approximately 48 hours, it seemed like the mystery had been solved. Springfield was in Oregon. Then the show continued, as it had before, placing Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers didn't treat Groening's confession as definitive. The ambiguity continued. The contradiction machine kept running. Because the contradiction machine is the point. Springfield's geographic impossibility serves a function that becomes clearer when you think about what kind of show The Simpsons is trying to be. The show's stated ambition, from the beginning, was to create an American town that felt familiar to viewers regardless of where they actually lived. Not a specific regional portrait, not a show set in the South that only resonated with Southern viewers, or set in the Midwest in a way that felt particular to that specific cultural geography. Springfield was meant to be every American town simultaneously. The place you grew up in, wherever you grew up. And a town that exists everywhere simultaneously cannot exist anywhere specifically. If Springfield has a fixed location on a real map, it becomes that location. It acquires the specific associations and regional identity of wherever it lands. It stops being universal and starts being particular. The ambiguity isn't a failure to commit, it's a design choice that keeps the show's ambitions intact. Groening has confirmed this. The writers have confirmed it. It's the official explanation, and it's a real one. But under the lens of the theories we've been exploring, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on different dimensions depending on which theory you're applying. If the radiation theory is correct, if the power plant has been warping the biology of Springfield's residents for decades, why should geography be exempt? The residents have 4 fingers and yellow skin, and physical characteristics that don't occur in nature. The animals have 3 eyes. The very laws of biology have been bent in Springfield. Why should the laws of geography be immune to whatever is happening in this town? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and ocean and desert within reach, because the contamination doesn't confine itself to affecting organic matter. Maybe the radiation has warped the physical landscape around the plant, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. The plant creates mutations in living things. Perhaps it also creates mutations in space itself, in the geography of the land around it, making Springfield a place that occupies multiple geographic positions simultaneously. Because the normal rules of physical space have been as compromised as the normal rules of biology. That's a stretch, even by The Simpsons' internal logic, but it's worth noting that the show has never given you a reason not to stretch that far. The coma theory offers a simpler and perhaps more emotionally resonant explanation. Homer's dreaming brain doesn't have a precise, accurate map of the United States available to it. It has impressions. It has fragments. It has the specific, incomplete, emotionally colored geography of a particular life lived in a particular way, vacation memories layered on top of childhood memories, layered on top of things seen on television and in movies, and heard described by other people. Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape it ever encountered, real or imagined, overlapping them without regard for geographic logic, because dreams don't have geographic logic. They have emotional logic. They arrange space according to feeling rather than fact. Springfield feels like America because it's made from Homer's fragmented memory of America, and that memory is scattered and incomplete and held together by longing rather than cartography. Mountains from a trip someone mentioned, ocean from a commercial he half-watched, deserts from a film he fell asleep during, the Midwest farmland of somewhere he passed through. All of it layered on top of each other in the specific way that makes sense to a sleeping mind that isn't worrying about whether the geography is consistent. The principal and the pauper interpretation Springfield as a community organized around collective denial offers the most politically pointed reading. You can't investigate a community you can't locate. You can't bring regulatory action against a nuclear facility if the state it's operating in keeps shifting. You can't hold anyone legally accountable for decades of environmental violations if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield's geographic ambiguity isn't just a narrative device. It's a form of legal protection. A town with no fixed location has no consistent regulatory authority, no permanent EPA oversight from a specific regional office, no particular state attorney general with ongoing jurisdiction over the case. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means being findable. Being findable means being accountable. And accountability, for a town built on the specific kind of systemic denial that Springfield practices, is existentially threatening. Every state in the Union has been theorized as Springfield's home at some point. Every theory has evidence supporting it. Every theory has evidence disproving it. The show has maintained this state of permanent ambiguity with deliberate care for longer than most of its viewers have been alive. And it will never give you an answer. Not because it hasn't decided, but because it decided long ago that Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as a place. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone who watches. A town that belongs to everyone is a town that nobody, not the EPA, not state regulators, not federal investigators, and not the audience itself, can ever fully pin down and hold accountable. Springfield doesn't have a location. Springfield is a condition. Section 10. The Floating Timeline and Why Nobody Ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old in December of 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8 then. She is 8 now. Maggie was 1. Maggie is 1. Homer and Marge were approximately in their mid-30s. They still are. 36 years have elapsed in the actual world, during which the actual audience for this show has been born, grown up, had children, and in some cases begun to age in ways that feel genuinely uncomfortable to contemplate. And 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry term is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025 with contemporary technology, contemporary cultural references, contemporary events in the background. When an episode aired in 1997, the characters were living in 1997. The calendar changes, the world around them changes, the characters do not. It's a standard feature of long-running animated comedies. The Simpsons isn't unique in using it. Most viewers accept it as a genre convention without thinking too hard about it, the same way they accept that animated characters don't have moving mouths that precisely match their dialogue, or that gravity in cartoons works differently than it does in physics. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has created contradictions so massive and so internally peculiar that they've started to crack the foundation of the show's reality in ways that seem to demand explanation. The most obvious crack involves Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their shared history was anchored in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school during that era. Their courtship was set against the backdrop of that specific cultural moment, with appropriate music and fashion and references. This made sense. Parents in their mid-30s in 1989 would have been teenagers in the late 1970s, and the math worked. But the floating timeline has dragged the present forward. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they didn't meet in 1980. They met somewhere around 2005, which means their formative years weren't defined by Watergate and disco. They were defined by MySpace and early YouTube and the specific cultural atmosphere of the mid-2000s. Their teenage experience happened in an entirely different America than the one the show originally depicted. The show has addressed this by simply rewriting their origin story multiple times. In later flashback episodes, Homer and Marge's youth has been relocated to the 1990s, then to the early 2000s, and eventually to the 2010s, depending on when the flashback episode was produced. Each version places their formative years in a different decade. The love story is the same. The characters are the same. But the cultural backdrop they exist against keeps sliding forward in time because the math requires it. Which means that Homer and Marge don't have a fixed past. They have an approximation. They have whatever backstory is needed to make the current episode work. Their history is a draft that gets revised every few years to keep the arithmetic of their ages consistent with the present date. Their memories are, in a very specific sense, unstable. They remember things differently depending on when the show needs them to remember. Now apply every theory we've discussed to this single fact. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Of course the timeline floats. Of course the backstory keeps shifting. Homer's dreaming brain is improvising the past as needed, filling in whatever history the current dream moment requires, because dreams don't have archives. Dreams don't have consistent records of the past to draw on. Dreams have the emotional truth of memory without the factual specificity. Homer remembers the feeling of meeting Marge in high school, the feeling of falling in love, the feeling of their early years together. The specific decade, the specific cultural backdrop, those are details his unconscious mind fills in with whatever is contextually plausible when it needs them. The timeline floats because the dream floats. Because an unconscious mind running a simulation of a life it doesn't actually have access to anymore can't maintain perfect historical consistency. It can only approximate. And every time a new episode needs a flashback, the approximation gets updated to fit the current moment. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their mutated biology has been altered in ways that interfere with normal aging processes at the cellular level. The power plant's contamination has done something to the residents of Springfield that standard gerontology doesn't have a framework for describing. It has suspended or dramatically slowed the normal progression of biological aging, creating a population that is functionally immortal in terms of physical appearance even as the calendar continues advancing around them. This would also explain the backstory instability. If the residents' memories are affected by chronic neurological damage from radiation exposure, which the show has established through Homer's case, but may apply to varying degrees across the entire population, then their recall of their own histories may be compromised. They don't remember the past accurately. They remember a version of it that has been distorted by whatever the contamination has done to the memory systems of their brains. And that distorted memory produces different versions of the same past depending on when it's accessed. The principal and the pauper interpretation says the residents of Springfield don't age, because aging is another truth the town has collectively voted to deny. Just as they voted to sustain the fiction of Skinner's identity, just as they have collectively agreed to forget every catastrophe that should have permanently altered their town, they have agreed not to acknowledge the passage of time. They have built a social reality in which time doesn't advance, in which the children stay young and the adults stay middle-aged and the town stays exactly the same, because acknowledging that time has passed would mean acknowledging everything that time has done. If Bart is really 46 years old, what does that mean for the school? For his relationship with his parents? For the entire social structure of Springfield, which is built around his being a mischievous child rather than a middle-aged man with his own life? The town has a vested interest in Bart being 10. Everyone in Springfield has made choices and built relationships based on the assumption that Bart is 10, that Lisa is 8, that Homer and Marge are young parents still in the middle of raising their family. Acknowledging the real passage of time would require rebuilding the entire social landscape of the community. So the community votes, silently and collectively and without ever calling a meeting to do it, to maintain the fiction that time is standing still. Just as they voted to maintain the fiction about Skinner's identity. Just as they vote, episode after episode, to forget the disasters and the catastrophes and the dome and the three-eyed fish, Springfield doesn't forget. Springfield votes not to remember, and the timeline floats because the vote keeps passing. The show has imagined its characters aging. It's done it more than once. In Lisa's wedding, the show flashes forward to show Lisa at 23, engaged, beginning her adult life in a future that is detailed and specific and emotionally resonant. She has grown up. She has become the person the show has always been building her toward, intelligent and principled and somewhat lonely, and searching for connection in a world that doesn't quite understand her. The episode proves that The Simpsons is capable of imagining its characters as adults. It can envision their futures. It can tell stories about who they'd become if time were allowed to pass. But it chooses not to. The flash forward is a single episode. A what if. A glimpse through a window that closes immediately afterward. Lisa returns to being 8. Bart returns to being 10. The future is locked away. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. Here's why. And this is the piece that extends beyond the show itself, beyond Springfield, beyond any individual theory. The Simpsons is the American family. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. They have been the American family through recessions and wars and cultural upheavals and technological revolutions and political transformations that have changed virtually every other aspect of American life. And the American family, as The Simpsons depicts it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must always be middle-aged and struggling and somehow lovable in spite of everything. Marge must always be patient and capable and the quiet center of the whole structure. Bart must always be rebellious and funny and occasionally tender in ways that catch you off guard. Lisa must always be brilliant and lonely and reaching for something better than what Springfield offers. Maggie must always be silent and watching and full of whatever potential she's been accumulating behind that pacifier. The dynamic must be preserved because it isn't the moment Bart goes to college and Lisa moves away and Maggie finally speaks and Homer retires and Marge is alone in the house on Evergreen Terrace with the kids' rooms empty. The show becomes something different. It becomes an elegy for something that's over. It becomes the story of a family that ran out of time. And we aren't ready for that story. We haven't been ready for it for 36 years. Every time we sit down to watch The Simpsons, we are making a choice to maintain the fiction. We are voting, just like Springfield votes, to sustain the world as it was, to keep the children young, to keep the family intact, to keep the timeline floating. The loop isn't their prison, it's ours. We built it, we maintain it. We tune in every season to confirm that the walls are still standing, that the family is still on the couch, that the opening credits still play the same way they always have with the saxophone and the school bus, and the family converging on the same couch from different directions. Every time we watch, we make the loop a little tighter. We make it a little harder for any of them to grow, because growing would mean ending, and ending would mean admitting something we've been not admitting for decades, that the version of America The Simpsons represents the chaotic, resilient, eternally middle class, endlessly struggling and endlessly recovering American family was always fragile, was always just barely holding together, was always one bad month, one missed payment, one more invisible injury away from becoming something we wouldn't recognize anymore. The Simpsons are trapped in a loop because we trapped them there. And we trapped them there because we needed somewhere that time wouldn't reach, somewhere that the couch we sat on as children was still intact, still in the same living room, still in front of the same television, with the same family piling onto it every Sunday night. Time stopped in Springfield because we stopped it. We pressed pause in 1989 and we haven't pressed play since. And now here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family in the same house on the same impossible street, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will, because we won't let it. Section 11. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and Springfield's Hidden Tragedies. Let's talk about two characters who exist at opposite ends of Springfield's moral spectrum, and whose stories, when you examine them closely, reveal something about what the show is really saying underneath all the jokes. The first is Hans Moleman. The second is Ned Flanders. Together, they tell you more about the true nature of Springfield than almost any other characters in the show. And the things they tell you are considerably darker than the comedy surrounding them might suggest. Hans Moleman first. If you've watched The Simpsons for any amount of time, you know him. He's the tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes with a regularity that suggests he might be one of the town's most active residents, even though nobody seems to know much about him or pay him any particular attention. He wears thick glasses. He carries a cane. He walks with the specific cautious shuffle of someone who has learned to be afraid of the world. He dies constantly. This is his defining characteristic, his running gag, his contribution to the show's comedic vocabulary. He gets hit by cars. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets buried alive. He gets eaten by animals in scenarios that seem to specifically involve animals choosing him over more obvious threats. He gets struck by lightning. He gets incinerated. He walks into traffic and disappears under wheels with a regularity that suggests the vehicles of Springfield have developed a specific targeting instinct for Hans Moleman. By the most conservative estimate, Moleman has actually died, within the canonical logic of regular non-Halloween episodes dozens of times across the show's run. Not in dream sequences, not in what-if scenarios. In regular episodes, in the established reality of Springfield, Hans Moleman ceases to be alive. And then he appears in the next episode, completely fine. No explanation, no resurrection, no acknowledgement that he was dead 2 weeks ago. He simply shows up again, ready to be destroyed again, in a cycle that has continued for decades without comment. Most viewers accept this as a background running gag. Moleman dies a lot because it's funny. Don't think about it too hard. But if you apply the show's internal theories to Hans Moleman, the comedy starts to look different. He once stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at him. He appears to be in his late 80s or 90s by any visual estimate. His skin has the specific quality of someone who has lived an extraordinarily long time and not had a pleasant go of it. His body is frail in ways that go well beyond ordinary elderly frailty. He moves like someone who has been worn down to almost nothing. If he's telling the truth about being 31, something has aged him catastrophically. Something has taken a man who should be in the middle of his life and compressed several decades of biological aging into whatever actual time he's been alive. Something that also paradoxically made him functionally impossible to kill in any permanent way. The radiation theory has an answer. Moleman could represent the most extreme mutation in Springfield's population, a man whose biology has been so profoundly altered by the power plant's contamination that his cellular processes have been essentially inverted. He ages at a dramatically accelerated rate, which accounts for looking 90 at 31. But his body has also developed the capacity to reconstitute itself after fatal trauma, which accounts for the ongoing resurrection cycle. The radiation didn't just mutate his appearance, it fundamentally rewrote his relationship with death, making it a temporary condition rather than a permanent one. He doesn't heal from injuries the way Homer heals. Homer endures damage and recovers through the show's cartoon physics. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function. And then, somewhere between episodes, the cellular reconstitution happens and he reassembles himself, because whatever the plant has done to him at the molecular level doesn't respect the normal finality of biological death. The coma theory reads Moleman differently. In Homer's dream, Moleman is a background process, a supporting character that Homer's unconscious mind uses to populate the crowd scenes of Springfield without devoting any significant cognitive resources to maintaining his continuity. Homer doesn't care much about Moleman, doesn't have strong feelings about him, doesn't have detailed memories of his personal history. So the dream runs Moleman on minimal processing power, and occasionally the minimal processing power isn't enough to keep him going, and he dies. And then the dream needs him again for the next episode, so it reassembles him without worrying about whether his death in the previous episode was something that should have lasting consequences. Moleman isn't a person in Homer's dream. He's a piece of furniture. Furniture that breaks and gets fixed and breaks again because nobody who matters to the dream cares enough about it to maintain it carefully. The collective denial theory reads Moleman as simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, repeatedly, visibly, in front of witnesses, and nobody calls for an investigation. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. Nobody seems to register the strangeness of his situation. Because Springfield has normalized Moleman's death cycle the same way it has normalized everything else that should be alarming, he dies. He comes back. This is known. Nobody mentions it. Now let's turn to the darker story. Ned Flanders. On the surface, Ned is everything Homer isn't. He's kind, he's generous, he's devoutly religious in a way the show sometimes uses for comedy but never quite mocks directly. He's physically fit and financially responsible, and a genuinely good father to his sons Rod and Todd. He has a warmth toward his neighbors that appears genuine rather than performed. He is by any objective measure a better person than Homer Simpson in almost every way that can be evaluated, and the show punishes him relentlessly for it. Maud Flanders was killed in an accident at the Springfield Motor Speedway. A t-shirt cannon misfired. Homer was dodging the launched t-shirts because he wanted to catch them. The shirts hit Maud instead. She fell from the bleachers. She died. Homer's selfishness, his reflexive, thoughtless self-interest that is so fundamental to his character that it operates below the level of conscious choice, directly caused the death of his neighbor's wife, the woman Ned had built his life around, the mother of his children. And Ned forgave him, because Ned forgives. That's what Ned does. He absorbs whatever comes at him and responds with grace and patience and an expression of faith that the situation serves some larger purpose he may not be able to see yet. But there's an episode 1 that fans remember as one of the show's most psychologically interesting that reveals the specific mechanism of Ned's forgiveness, and it's not what it appears to be. After a hurricane destroys Ned's house, the community rallies to rebuild it. They rebuild it badly with good intentions but no skill, producing something structurally unsound that collapses almost immediately. Ned has a breakdown, a genuine, complete psychological collapse in which he says, to the assembled crowd of people who just destroyed his house while trying to help him, everything he has been suppressing for years. He doesn't get violent. He doesn't become dangerous in any physical sense. But the despair that comes out of him is bottomless. He says the quiet, accumulated things, the things he's been holding, he's institutionalized afterward. And in the mental health facility, a therapist reveals the history of his behavioral conditioning. Ned was not always like this. As a child, Ned was wild, violent and uncontrollable, with the specific energy of a child who has no structure and no boundaries and no guidance from parents who, being committed beatniks who genuinely didn't believe in discipline, were incapable of providing any of those things. His parents took him to a psychiatrist. That psychiatrist spent years conditioning the aggression and the wildness out of Ned through intensive behavioral modification. He trained Ned's brain to suppress anger completely, to route every negative emotion through a filter that converts it into patience or forgiveness or cheerfulness, regardless of what the emotion actually is. Ned's kindness isn't a character trait. It's a cage. It's a psychological structure built around a feral child by a doctor who essentially rewired his emotional responses before he was old enough to consent to or even understand the process. Everything about Ned reads differently once you know this. His patience with Homer isn't saintly, it's pathological. His brain was literally conditioned to be unable to express anger, regardless of whether the anger is earned. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death isn't grace. It's the programmed response of a man whose psychological architecture doesn't give him access to sustained fury, even when fury would be the rational and proportionate response to what happened. His faith isn't purely spiritual conviction. It's also a coping framework that his mind uses to explain why he keeps experiencing terrible things despite doing everything the framework tells him to do. The framework says, be good, trust God, endure. And so Ned is good and trusts God and endures. And the terrible things keep happening. Because here is the thing that the show establishes quietly and never quite states directly. God talks to Homer. God appears to Homer twice in face-to-face conversations. The man who drinks too much and sleeps at his workstation and once caused a nuclear incident with a donut gets divine attention and divine conversation. The drunk who naps through church services gets the theological equivalent of a personal callback. And Ned Flanders, who has dedicated his entire life to his faith, who attends services faithfully and prays sincerely, and tries at every moment to conduct himself according to the moral framework he's committed to, Ned gets silence. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. That's not random. That's not coincidence. That's the show making a specific statement about how the universe of Springfield works. Goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. Compliance with the expected moral framework is not protected. Ned is the most devoted man in town, and his wife died because his neighbor was dodging t-shirts. His house was destroyed by a hurricane. His psychology was invaded and rewritten by a doctor when he was a child. And the God he prays to apparently finds Homer Simpson more worth engaging with than the man who has never stopped listening for an answer. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that doesn't reward rightness. He's the character who followed all the rules and got nothing from it except the ability to keep following the rules, because his brain was conditioned to do that regardless of what the rules produce. Homer is what happens when you do most things wrong in a system that doesn't punish wrongness adequately. He falls and recovers. He fails and comes back. He causes damage and absorbs consequences that somehow don't add up to anything permanent. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years, separated by a low fence and an enormous gulf that the show never closes. Because the system isn't designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Ned at the church and Homer at the plant and Burns at the top and Moleman in the cycle of dying and returning and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that doesn't break. That's what these two characters are, at their most fundamental. They're illustrations of how Springfield's internal logic distributes reward and punishment. They're proof that the system isn't fair, was never designed to be fair, and has no mechanism for becoming fair without first dismantling itself entirely. Which is something Springfield has proven, repeatedly and definitively, that it will not do. Section 12. The Grand Unified Theory of Springfield. We've been in Springfield for a while now. We've followed the radiation from the cracked cooling towers into the water supply, through the fish, into the bodies of the people who drink the water and eat the fish, and breathe the air of a town that the federal government has officially classified as an environmental hazard. We've sat in the hospital room in Springfield General and watched Homer Simpson flatline and asked ourselves whether he ever truly came back. We've reopened the Burns shooting case and found the evidence considerably less settled than the official verdict suggests. We've tracked Burns's impossible age across a century and traced the medical infrastructure that keeps him running like a machine that has outlasted its original purpose but cannot afford to stop. We've watched Springfield vote to make truth illegal. We've counted Maggie's silences and found intelligence in every one of them. We've cataloged the predictions and understood them as something more interesting than prophecy. We've followed Mona Simpson's trail from 1969 to a quiet hospital room decades later and seen the wreckage that one man's grudge left across 3 generations of one family. We've searched for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere. We've stared at the floating timeline until the loop stared back. And now it's time to ask the question that all of these theories are really asking underneath their specific claims and their specific evidence. What is The Simpsons actually about? Not in terms of its genre or its format or its surface-level satirical targets. What is it about at the level that makes it, 36 years later, still the most analyzed and theorized and argued about show in television history? What is the thing that all of these theories are circling around, approaching from different angles, trying to name? Here's what seems true across all of them. The Simpsons is a show about a system that perpetuates itself by making it impossible for the people inside it to see clearly enough to challenge it. Burns poisons the town. The poison makes the people less capable of recognizing they've been poisoned. The poisoned people elect the compromised officials and employ the incompetent safety inspector and vote to forget the disasters and make truth illegal and keep the system running because the system is the only thing they know, and dismantling it feels more threatening than sustaining it. Homer is cognitively impaired, possibly by radiation, possibly by a crayon, possibly by a childhood shaped by maternal loss engineered by his own employer. And his impairment makes him the perfect functionary for the system that impaired him. He can't see clearly enough to ask the questions that would disrupt the arrangement. He can't connect the dots between his employer and his mother's exile. He keeps working, keeps cycling through disasters and recoveries, keeps finding his way home at the end of each episode because the dream or the radiation damage or the collective denial won't let the story end. Marge holds the whole structure together through a combination of love and patience and an extraordinary ability to absorb what the world throws at the family without it breaking her. She is the load-bearing wall of the Simpson household, and the show knows it and occasionally acknowledges it, and then continues, requiring her to hold everything up without quite giving her the recognition that supporting everything deserves. Bart is energy without direction, genuine fire and genuine feeling and genuine creativity, pointed at whatever is in front of him rather than at anything systematic, because growing up in Springfield doesn't teach you how to direct fire at systems. It teaches you how to aim it at available targets and then deal with the consequences. Lisa sees everything. Lisa has always seen everything. She is 8 years old, and she has spent her entire life in a town that structurally cannot allow her to do anything sustained or meaningful with what she sees, because the town is built to absorb and neutralize precisely that kind of clear-eyed perception. She keeps asking the questions anyway. She keeps pushing against the weight of Springfield's collective amnesia, the accumulated denial, the social contract that says certain things don't get mentioned. She is the only person in Springfield who hasn't stopped looking. And Maggie watches. Maggie watches all of it, from the floor, from the playpen, from behind the pacifier and the enormous eyes and the silence she's chosen as her defensive perimeter. She watches Homer absorb damage. She watches Marge hold everything together. She watches Bart burn and recover. She watches Lisa push and get pushed back. She watches Burns glow in the dark from across town. She watches the fish in the river that have 3 eyes. She sees the whole picture. She's the only one who does. And she's decided that the moment to reveal what she sees hasn't come yet, that there's something worth waiting for, that the right situation will present itself eventually. We've been waiting for Maggie's moment for 36 years. Every theory in this script is different from every other one. The radiation theory is materialist. It traces a physical cause through physical effects to physical consequences. The coma theory is psychological. It locates the entire narrative inside the damaged mind of one man and interprets everything else as a symptom of that containment. The Burns immortality theory is about the specific distortions that unchecked wealth produces when it's applied long enough and single-mindedly enough to the problem of survival. The principle and the pauper theory is sociological. It's about how communities protect themselves from uncomfortable truths through collective agreement. But they all arrive at the same place. They all describe a world where the normal mechanisms of consequence, accountability, growth, and change have been disabled, where things that should have lasting effects don't, where time should pass but doesn't, where people should learn and grow but remain frozen, where catastrophes should alter the landscape permanently but are forgotten by the following episode. And they all point to the same question. Why are we so drawn to that? Why, after 36 years, do we keep coming back to Springfield? Why do we rewatch episodes we've seen many times? Why do we build elaborate theories about a cartoon family? Why do the mysteries of this show matter to us in a way that the mysteries of most shows don't? Maybe because Springfield is not just a place we visit. Maybe it's a place we recognize. Maybe we keep coming back because Homer's exhaustion feels true, because Marge's patience feels earned, because Bart's energy without direction is something we remember from being young and feeling like the world was there for the taking before we understood that the world was more complicated than that. Because Lisa's frustration, the specific frustration of seeing clearly in a context that rewards not seeing, is something most people who have ever tried to improve something they care about have felt at some point. Maybe we keep coming back because Springfield's forgetting mirrors our own. Because the way the town resets after every catastrophe is recognizable to anyone who has watched communities they belong to absorb a disaster and then slowly, quietly agree to normalize what happened and move on. Maybe we keep coming back because of Homer's dream. Because the idea that somewhere out there is a version of your family, preserved exactly as they were at the moment you loved them most, in a house that always looks the same and a town that never changes, is a wish so fundamental it doesn't need to be stated. It just has to be dreamed. The Simpsons has been dreaming that dream for 36 years. 800 episodes, thousands of jokes, dozens of theories. One family. Every mystery we've explored tonight traces back to the same essential core. A man who wanted his family to stay the way they were. A town that built its survival on not looking too closely at what sustains it. A system that keeps running by making it impossible for the people inside it to see the system clearly enough to stop it. And a cartoon that has been, for longer than most of its audience has been alive, a portrait of something that is partly funny and partly true, and partly an ache we can't quite name. The ache of watching time pass, of watching children grow up and houses change, and the couch from your childhood end up somewhere you can't reach anymore. Springfield doesn't age because we need it not to. Because somewhere in the logic of what this show has always been doing, in all the radiation theories and coma theories and who shot Burns debates and immortal billionaires and silent genius babies and impossible geography somewhere underneath all of that, there's a simpler truth. We built Springfield to last. We return to it because we need somewhere that stays. And every Sunday night, or whenever we sit down with it now, with the streaming and the reruns and the clips that keep circulating on social media, we go back to Evergreen Terrace. We sit down on the couch. We hear the theme. We watch Homer running home at the end of the opening credits, barely making it through the door before the rest of the family arrives. He always makes it just in time. He always does. That's not an accident. That's the dream. That's Homer's dream and Marge's dream, and maybe ours as well. That no matter how chaotic the day was, how much went wrong, how many near misses and disasters and forgotten catastrophes accumulated between Monday and Sunday at the end, the family is on the couch together. The story continues. The loop keeps going. Nobody has to say goodbye yet. The nuclear plant hums in the dark beyond the window. Maggie watches from her corner with those enormous eyes. Lisa's saxophone drifts down from upstairs. Bart is plotting something that will require Homer to strangle him by morning. Marge is in the kitchen, doing the thing she always does. The thing that holds all of it together. And Homer is home. He is always, in the end, home. That's Springfield. That's the whole thing, all of it. Every theory and every mystery and every 36 years of it reduced to its simplest, most fundamental truth. Whatever is wrong with that town, and we've established tonight that quite a lot is wrong, it is also the place where Homer Simpson always finds his way to the couch, where the family always assembles, where the story always continues for one more episode. Because the dream won't let it end. Because the dream knows that the moment it ends, Homer wakes up. And none of us are quite ready for that yet. So the loop keeps running. The timeline keeps floating. The children stay young. The plant keeps humming. And somewhere in Springfield, in a house on Evergreen Terrace that doesn't appear on any real map, a family is sitting down to dinner and arguing and laughing and making a mess of everything and somehow, impossibly holding together, just like they always have, just like they always will. Thank you for spending the night in Springfield. If you've made it this far, you've gone deeper into this show than almost anyone. Sweet dreams, and if you wake up in Springfield, don't drink the water. End of script. Total estimated runtime at standard narration pace, approximately 130 to 150 words per minute, 5 to 6 hours of audio content. Optimized for 11 Labs voiceover generation. Narrative tone is consistent throughout, conversational, measured, story-driven, with natural breath points built into paragraph spacing. Expanded section deep dives and additional theories. The Simpsons and the nature of memory. There is something worth sitting with before we go further. Something that connects almost every theory we've discussed and gives them a shared foundation. Memory is unreliable. This is not a controversial statement in any scientific context. Human memory is not a recording device. It is a reconstructive process. Every time a person recalls a past event, they are not retrieving a stored file. They are rebuilding that event from available fragments, filling in gaps with expectations and emotions and the influence of everything that has happened since. The rebuilt version feels authentic, feels precise, feels like it corresponds to what actually happened. But it has been edited. Every recall edits the memory slightly. Every retelling of a remembered event reshapes it toward the version that fits the current context. Springfield is a town built on memory. And every theory about Springfield from every direction arrives eventually at this same observation. The memories are wrong. The history keeps changing. The backstory keeps shifting. The past keeps being revised to accommodate a present that has drifted far from whatever the past actually was. If Homer is in a coma, his dreaming mind reconstructs his family's past from fragments that are frozen at April 1993. The dream does its best with incomplete reference material, and the gaps get filled in with whatever the dreaming brain improvises. Which is why the backstory keeps changing. The dream isn't remembering, it's rebuilding. If the radiation theory is correct, the population's memory function has been compromised by chronic neurological exposure. The residents of Springfield have difficulty maintaining consistent memories not because they're careless, but because the systems that store and retrieve memories have been subtly damaged over decades. The history keeps changing because the people telling it can't hold on to the previous version long enough to maintain consistency. If the collective denial theory is correct, the community has an active incentive to revise its memories toward versions that support the current consensus narrative. Memories that contradict the official story are allowed to fade. Memories that support it are reinforced. The backstory shifts not through neurological damage but through social pressure, the subtle, constant influence of a community that knows, without discussing it openly, what kinds of memories are welcome and what kinds aren't. 3 different theories. The same observable phenomenon. The memories are wrong, and the wrong memories serve the system that produced the wrongness. This is not unique to Springfield. This is something that happens in real communities, real institutions, real families. The specific detail that The Simpsons adds, the specific observational precision that makes it more than just cartoon comedy, is that it shows you how comprehensive the mechanism can be, how deeply a community can commit to a revised version of its own history, how effective collective memory management can be when it's practiced long enough by enough people simultaneously. Springfield has been practicing for 36 years. The character of Lisa Simpson as the show's true protagonist. There is an argument, a serious one, made by serious critics over the show's run, that Lisa Simpson is the actual protagonist of The Simpsons. Not Homer, despite Homer's obvious narrative centrality. Not Marge, despite Marge being the structural support the whole family depends on. Lisa. The argument runs like this. Homer is the protagonist of the show's comedy, but Lisa is the protagonist of the show's conscience. She is the character who asks the questions the show is actually asking. She is the character who sees what the show actually sees. She is the character whose emotional experience most closely tracks what the show is inviting the audience to feel when the comedy falls away and something more honest takes its place. Homer's emotional experience is largely reactive. He responds to circumstances. He doesn't, in general, generate sustained contemplation about the nature of his situation or the systems that produced it. His experience of Springfield is broad and sensory and immediate. Lisa's emotional experience is reflective. She is perpetually turning the world over in her mind, examining it from multiple angles, asking what it means and why it is the way it is and what should be done about it. She is, within the show, the character who performs the function the fan theories perform from outside the show, the function of sustained, questioning attention directed at a world that would prefer not to be questioned. And the show consistently, deliberately, with what reads as intentional design, frustrates her. Lisa's intelligence produces isolation rather than connection. Her moral seriousness produces distance rather than relationship. Her attempts to improve her environment produce resistance rather than change. She is the show's most capable character and its most consistently thwarted one. The message, the specific, pointed, somewhat uncomfortable message that the show seems to be delivering through Lisa's experience is that in Springfield, having the clearest possible view of what's wrong is not an advantage. It is, in fact, a burden. The clearest sight comes with the most specific pain. Homer doesn't suffer in that particular way because Homer can't see clearly enough to be pained by what's there. The crayon, the radiation, the accumulated damage of decades, all of it produces a fog that, while catastrophic in every clinical sense, also provides something that might technically be called protection. Homer cannot fully understand the architecture of his own captivity, and because he can't understand it, he can't feel the specific weight of it that Lisa carries. Lisa can see the cage. She has to live in it anyway. And nobody else in Springfield is sufficiently interested in the cage to join her in trying to figure out how it opens. This is why the show has always been, at its most honest level, simultaneously a comedy and a tragedy. It's a comedy because Homer's fog produces genuinely funny situations. It's a tragedy because Lisa's clarity produces genuinely heartbreaking ones. And the two things coexist in every episode, layered on top of each other, with the comedy accessible to everyone and the tragedy accessible to whoever is paying close enough attention. Springfield's economy and the trap of dependency. Here's a detail that the show establishes gradually, across multiple seasons and dozens of episodes, without ever drawing explicit attention to it. Springfield's economy is almost entirely dependent on the nuclear power plant. This isn't hyperbole. The plant employs a significant portion of the town's workforce directly. Its payroll circulates through every local business that those workers spend their paychecks at. The tax revenue from the plant, however much Burns has minimized, through the use of accountants and political influence funds, municipal services. The electricity the plant generates is the infrastructure that allows every other economic activity in Springfield to function. The plant is the foundation, and Burns owns the foundation. This means that every threat to Burns, every challenge to the plant's operations, every lawsuit or regulatory action or political campaign against the facility carries an implicit economic threat to the entire community. The people most harmed by the plant's contamination are also the people most dependent on the plant's continued operation. There is no way for them to pursue accountability without simultaneously threatening their own economic survival. This is not a fictional situation. This is one of the most precisely documented dynamics in real-world political economy. Company towns, communities that have organized their economic life around a single employer, to the degree that the employer's interests and the community's interests become inseparable, have been studied extensively. The research consistently finds the same pattern. Residents of company towns are significantly less likely to report environmental violations, workplace hazards, or corporate misconduct than comparable residents of economically diversified communities. They know what would happen to the community's economic foundation if they did, and they conclude, often without fully consciously articulating the conclusion, that silence is the safer option. Springfield is the most extreme fictional version of this dynamic ever depicted. Burns owns the power plant. The power plant is the economy. The economy is the community's survival. And so Burns owns the community's survival. Not through sinister conspiracy, though there is sinister conspiracy too, but through the ordinary mechanisms of economic dependency, applied with enough consistency over enough time to produce a community that can no longer imagine challenging the hand that feeds it. The radiation isn't just a health crisis. It's an economic trap. The contamination and the dependency are two sides of the same arrangement. You cannot address one without addressing the other. And addressing both simultaneously would require a level of coordinated, sustained, community-wide action that Springfield, its population already neurologically compromised by the contamination that the economic dependency prevents them from addressing, is not capable of producing. It's a closed loop. Burns designed it, whether intentionally or through the application of sufficient self-interest over sufficient time. And the people inside it can barely see the walls. The guest stars as psychological evidence. Let's return to something we touched on in the coma theory section, because it deserves more sustained attention than we gave it. The Simpsons has featured an almost uncountable number of celebrity guest appearances over its run. Some episodes feature guests who are integrated naturally into the story, playing characters whose presence serves the narrative. Others feature celebrities essentially playing themselves, appearing in Springfield for reasons that the plot provides, but that always feel, at some level, slightly arbitrary. In the early seasons, guest appearances were relatively rare and relatively organic. Later seasons became saturated with celebrity appearances to a degree that genuinely changed the texture of the show. Episodes built around guest stars, extended subplots created specifically to justify the presence of a celebrity who needed a story reason to be in Springfield. An ongoing parade of famous people who, within the logic of the show, kept finding their way to this specific small town in an unnamed American state. From outside the coma theory, this is just a fact about how the show's production philosophy evolved. Guest stars attract viewers. They generate press coverage. They provide a built-in hook for promotional material. It's good television business. From inside the coma theory, it's evidence of something else. Homer's brain, lying in that hospital room for decades, is receiving input from the environment around his unconscious body. The television in the corner, the radio, the voices of family members who come to sit with him, conversations between nurses in the hallway, cultural references that filter through the fog of unconsciousness in the form of sound without context. In this reading, every celebrity who appears in Springfield is a voice Homer heard, an actor whose voice came through a television program playing somewhere in the hospital, a musician whose songs were in the radio's rotation during the hour Homer's brain happened to be processing audio input, a public figure whose name was mentioned in a news broadcast that seeped through the wall from another room. Homer's dreaming mind caught the voice, caught the name, caught the fragment of cultural signal, and incorporated it into the dream. It gave the voice a face and a story reason to be in Springfield, and placed them in whatever episode the dream was currently generating. The escalating parade of celebrity appearances isn't a reflection of the show's increasing reliance on star power as a creative shortcut. It's a reflection of Homer's brain's increasing reliance on external stimuli as the dream's internal resources thin over decades of unconsciousness. Early in the coma, the dream can run largely on Homer's own memories and his own imaginative capacity. As the years pass, as the brain's own resources deplete, it has to reach further outward, catch more fragments from the ambient environment, and incorporate more external material into the narrative to keep it going. More celebrities means the dream is working harder to stay coherent. The saturation of guest stars in the later seasons is, in this reading, a symptom. The dream is straining. Homer's brain is running low on internal material and compensating by absorbing more from outside. The story is getting bigger and stranger because the engine driving it has less and less of its own fuel left. The Raven episode and what it tells us. Season 2, Episode 1 of the Treehouse of Horror anthology. The Simpsons performs Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, with Homer as the narrator and Bart as the Raven itself. This episode shouldn't be here, in any serious theoretical discussion of the show's internal consistency, because Treehouse of Horror episodes are explicitly non-canonical. They're Halloween specials. They exist outside the show's regular continuity. The things that happen in them don't count. But the Raven segment does something that's worth pausing on. It places Homer in the role of someone being driven mad by loss, and by the refusal of the world to give him the one thing he genuinely wants, which is the return of something precious that has been taken from him. The Raven sits on his bust of Pallas and says, "Nevermore," in response to every question Homer asks about whether Lenore might return. The specific Lenore in Poe's poem is a woman, a beloved woman who has died. The poet spends the poem in a state of desperate, hoping that she might come back, asking the Raven increasingly pointed questions about whether her return is possible, and receiving the same answer each time, nevermore. In the Simpsons version, Homer is the grief-stricken narrator, and the thing he's been robbed of, the Lenore of this adaptation, is open to interpretation. But in the context of the coma theory, it maps onto something specific: Homer's waking life, his access to his actual family, the real versions of Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, as opposed to the dream versions his unconscious mind is generating. The Raven says nevermore. The answer to whether he'll return is the same each time. He's in a room full of the memories of what he's lost. Something sits at the threshold of his consciousness and repeats the word that ends all hope. The Treehouse of Horror is supposed to be the section of the show where the darkness is permitted, where things can be genuinely scary and genuinely strange and genuinely sad in ways that the regular episodes contain but don't foreground. And in that context, placing Homer in Poe's most famous grief poem, in the very first Treehouse anthology the show ever produced, feels less accidental the longer you look at it. The Springfield tire fire as symbol. Springfield has a tire fire. It has had a tire fire for the entirety of the show's run. It appears in establishing shots. It comes up in conversation. It is treated by the residents as a permanent and unremarkable feature of the landscape, something that has been burning for so long that nobody remembers when it started, or thinks seriously about whether it could be extinguished. A tire fire is a genuinely interesting thing to build into the permanent background of your fictional town. Tire fires are real. They happen. And they are specifically difficult to put out, because the rubber and the oil and the internal structure of a tire, once ignited, produce a combustion that is self-sustaining in ways that most firefighting approaches can't adequately address. You can pour water on a tire fire and the water will have minimal effect. You can bury a tire fire and it will find a way to keep going, because the conditions for combustion persist inside the pile. The Springfield tire fire has been burning for decades. Nobody is trying to put it out. It has been normalized into the background of Springfield, the way the power plant has been normalized, and the three-eyed fish have been normalized, and every other impossible thing that Springfield accommodates without comment. And it functions as a symbol that's almost too obvious, once you see it, to require explanation. Springfield has a thing that shouldn't be burning. It has been burning for so long that nobody remembers when it started. It cannot be put out by any available means. It produces smoke that everyone in town breathes, continuously, as part of the everyday atmosphere of life in Springfield. And the residents have decided, or arrived at through the accumulation of unexamined days, that this is just how things are. The fire is part of Springfield. The fire is Springfield. The power plant is another version of the same thing. The corruption is another version of the same thing. The collective amnesia, the denial, the votes to maintain comfortable lies, all of it is a version of the tire fire. Things that started burning at some point and were never dealt with and have now been burning for so long that they feel permanent, natural, just how it is. Springfield is full of fires that nobody is putting out. On being symptomatic. There's a word we used earlier in discussing the radiation theory, symptomatic. The residents of Springfield aren't eccentric, they're symptomatic. What they appear to be from the outside quirky, amusing, a little extreme in their various personality directions is actually the surface expression of something underneath. Something that the show keeps gesturing toward without ever quite naming in those terms. A symptom is different from a trait. A trait is something that belongs to you. A symptom is something that happened to you. When we describe someone as having a quirky personality, we're attributing that quality to them as a person. When we describe someone as symptomatic, we're acknowledging that the quality we're observing is a response to a cause that the person themselves is not, at their core, the thing we're seeing. The person is experiencing something. The symptom is what that experience looks like from outside. Homer's cognitive impairment, Lisa's isolation, Ned's pathological patience, Marge's hypervigilance about keeping the family together, Bart's directionless energy, even Burns's immortality project, the weekly treatments, the obsessive survival infrastructure, all of it is symptomatic. All of it is the surface expression of something underneath that the show keeps putting in the frame without putting in the foreground. Springfield is a town of symptoms, and all the theories are attempts to name the disease. The radiation theory names it literally. The disease is radiation contamination, and the symptoms are the biological and neurological effects of decades of exposure. The coma theory names it metaphorically. The disease is unconsciousness, and the symptoms are the increasingly distorted output of a damaged dreaming mind. The collective denial theory names it sociologically. The disease is a community's inability to look honestly at itself, and the symptoms are the elaborate structures of denial that replace honest reckoning. They're different diagnoses. They describe the same symptoms, and all of them suggest the same treatment. Look. Actually look. Look at the three-eyed fish and follow the implications. Look at the glowing man in the forest and don't reach for alien visitation. Look at the bones in the basement and ask whose they are. Look at the timeline and notice that it's not floating, it's frozen. Look at the vote to sustain the lie and recognize it for what it is. The show keeps putting these things in the frame. The theories exist because some viewers looked at the frame carefully and noticed what was there. On What the Show Has Always Known About Itself, The Simpsons has, across its run, demonstrated a distinctive relationship with self-awareness. There are episodes where the show breaks the fourth wall explicitly, where characters acknowledge that they're characters in a television program, where the show comments on its own narrative conventions from inside those conventions. But there's another kind of self-awareness that operates below the explicit level, and it's the more interesting one. It's the awareness the show demonstrates in how it handles its own most uncomfortable implications. The coma theory scene from season 34, animated, detailed, then dismissed as a hoax. The alternate Burns shooting ending produced in full, then displayed as the wrong answer. The geographic contradictions maintained with such consistency that their maintenance starts to look like a choice rather than an oversight. These feel like a show that knows what's been built into it and is in a careful negotiation with that knowledge. Acknowledging the theories without confirming them, playing with the evidence without resolving it, maintaining the ambiguity because the ambiguity is, in a very specific sense, the show's most honest position. The Simpsons can't actually confirm that Homer is in a coma. That would end the show, or more precisely, it would transform the show into something fundamentally different, something with a different emotional weight and a different relationship to its own history. But the show doesn't want to simply deny the theory either, because the denial would require explaining away evidence that the show deliberately put there. So it maintains the negotiation, it acknowledges the theories with a wink, and then continues. It shows you the resolution and tells you it was a joke. It shows you the alternate ending and dismisses it as the wrong answer. It confirms the location and then immediately revises the confirmation. It's Springfield doing what Springfield does, maintaining the fiction while giving you enough information to see through it, if you're paying the right kind of attention. The show has always known what it was doing in the background. It has just never been able to admit it directly, because admitting it directly would be the one thing it cannot survive. The final mystery. After everything, after the radiation and the coma and the shooting and the immortality and the denial and the silence and the predictions and the conspiracy and the impossible geography and the frozen time, the final mystery is the simplest one. Why can't we let them go? We know the radiation theory, we know the coma theory, we know about the collective amnesia and the vote to maintain comfortable lies and the tire fire that nobody is putting out. We know about Burns's weekly glow and Maggie's strategic silence, and Lisa's lonely clarity and Homer's fog. We know all of this and we still sit down to watch. The theories don't diminish the show. They don't explain it away. If anything, they deepen it. They reveal something underneath the comedy that was always there waiting to be noticed. A portrait of a specific kind of human experience rendered in yellow, four-fingered, perpetually middle-aged cartoon form. The experience of living inside systems too large and too established to challenge. The experience of loving people in a world that makes loving people difficult. The experience of seeing clearly in an environment that rewards not seeing. The experience of wanting to hold on to something, a house, a family, a specific version of an evening and watching time, make that impossible while the dream insists it isn't. We can't let them go because they're us. Some part of Homer's desperate wish to stay home, to keep the kids young, to have the beer always cold and the couch always available, some part of that wish belongs to everyone who has ever loved something they couldn't keep. Springfield isn't a prediction of where we were heading. It's a description of where we already were. And we keep coming back because we recognize it. We recognize the tire fire nobody is putting out. We recognize the comfortable lie the community voted to maintain. We recognize the system that benefits from our incapacity to see it clearly. We recognize the fog. And we recognize underneath the fog the family. Still on the couch. Still together. Still making it through the episode. Homer always makes it home just in time. The family always assembles. The couch gag always plays. The credits always roll. And Springfield is always there when we come back. Exactly the way we left it. That's the whole mystery. That's all of it. A town where time stopped because we needed somewhere that would stay. A family that doesn't age because we couldn't bear to watch them grow old. A dream that keeps running because the alternative, waking up to a world without it, is the one thing nobody has figured out how to face. The nuclear plant hums. Maggie watches. Lisa plays her saxophone. Bart plans something. Marge holds everything together. And Homer is home. He is always, in the end, home. Sweet dreams. End of script. Estimated total runtime at standard narration pace, approximately 5 to 6 hours. Deep dive. The secondary characters of Springfield and what they reveal. Springfield's secondary characters, the people who populate the margins of every episode, who appear in crowd scenes and background gags and occasional featured stories, are often discussed as a collection of amusing eccentrics, and they are amusing. But they are also, when you look at them with the right kind of attention, a portrait of a community in specifically recognizable distress. Consider Apu Nahasapi Mapatilon, the owner and operator of the Quick E-Mart. Apu has a PhD from Caltech. He has a doctorate in computer science from one of the most respected technical universities in the world. He is, in terms of formal academic credentials, one of the most educated people in Springfield. He operates a convenience store. He works extraordinarily long hours. The show has established his working hours as essentially continuous, a person who is at the Quick E-Mart whether it's midnight or noon. He has 8 children with his wife Manjula, a marriage that the show depicts as having been arranged. He serves whatever customers come through the door without meaningful ability to choose who he serves or what circumstances surround those transactions. This is not a portrait of a person whose gifts and capabilities have been matched with an environment that could use them. Apu's situation in Springfield is the situation of a highly capable person whose options have been constrained to the point where his capabilities are functionally irrelevant to his actual daily life. His doctorate doesn't help him when Homer is demanding a hot dog at 3 a.m. His computational expertise doesn't factor into the calculation of how long he's been awake. Springfield absorbs Apu's capability the way it absorbs everything else, without acknowledgement, without utilization, without providing any mechanism for his specific gifts to make the specific difference they could make. He's there. He's capable. He's constrained. Sideshow Bob Dr. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is a Yale-educated intellectual with genuine cultural sophistication and what appears to be real artistic ability. He has appeared in multiple episodes pursuing artistic and intellectual endeavors that suggest a person whose capacities were not adequately met by the path his life took. His ongoing fixation on Bart Simpson, the specific personal grievance that has organized the most dramatic chapters of his life, is, in a certain light, the symptom of someone who needed a different world than the one Springfield provided and has never found a healthier outlet for the energy that mismatch produces. Comic book guy Jeff Albertson, whose name most viewers don't know because the show waited over 15 seasons to reveal. It has apparently spent his adult life operating a comic book store and consuming popular culture with a critical intensity that is, under different circumstances, exactly the kind of engagement that produces valuable criticism and genuine cultural analysis. In Springfield, it produces bitter condescension and elaborate rankings of television episodes. The capacity is real. The outlet is wrong. None of these characters is presented as being in the wrong place for reasons of personal failure. They are all, in their various ways, in the wrong place for reasons of systemic mismatch, capable people in an environment that has no adequate use for their capabilities, and that produces the specific distortions you'd expect from that mismatch applied over years or decades. This is another version of what the radiation theory describes at the biological level. The radiation produces physical and neurological distortions in the population. The social and economic structure of Springfield produces occupational and aspirational distortions. Both mechanisms operate on the same population, in the same direction, producing a community where almost nobody is doing the thing they're most capable of, and almost nobody has a realistic path to changing that. The treehouse of horror as truth-telling. The Treehouse of Horror anthology episodes produced annually since Season 2, as the show's Halloween special operate under a specific and interesting exemption. Events in the Treehouse episodes don't count. The show is explicit about this. What happens in the Halloween anthology doesn't carry over to the regular continuity. Characters who die in the Treehouse don't stay dead when the next regular episode airs. Scenarios that are established in the Halloween specials can be completely contradicted in the following week's episode. This exemption is usually understood as a production freedom. The Treehouse segments allow the writers to experiment with genre and concept and consequence without committing to the results in a way that would constrain future storytelling. It's a sandbox. Things can happen there that couldn't happen in the regular show because the regular show has to live with its own consequences. But there's another way to understand the Treehouse of Horror exemption, and it's one that fits neatly with several of the theories we've been discussing. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are where the show is allowed to tell the truth. Regular Springfield, the Springfield of the floating timeline, and the collective amnesia and the vote to maintain comfortable lies operates under the social contract that says certain things don't get acknowledged. The catastrophes reset, the impossible events get forgotten. The continuity gets smoothed over. This is the waking dream of Springfield, the agreed-upon version of reality. The Treehouse of Horror is what happens when the agreement slips, when the denial mechanism temporarily fails, when Springfield has to face, for the duration of a Halloween special, the things it normally works very hard not to look at directly. Homer dies in the Treehouse segments. Repeatedly. In elaborately specific and sometimes genuinely disturbing ways. The family faces genuine supernatural threats that can't be resolved through Homer's cartoon resilience. Characters experience real loss, real fear, real permanent consequences that the regular show won't allow. The Treehouse is where Springfield's defenses come down enough for the actual horror to surface. And the actual horror is familiar when it appears. It's a version of the horror we've been discussing in the regular episodes all night. The horror of a system that doesn't protect the people inside it. The horror of a man who tries and fails to protect his family from threats he's not equipped to understand. The horror of a community that absorbs damage and cannot meaningfully respond to it. The Treehouse makes it explicit. The regular episodes make it deniable. They're the same show, saying the same things, but in different registers. One with the denial mechanism engaged, one with it briefly suspended. And every year, after the Treehouse is over, the mechanism re-engages. Springfield goes back to normal. The deaths are forgotten. The catastrophes are reset. The agreement resumes, just like it always does. Springfield's relationship with celebrity and fame. Let's think about what fame means in Springfield. When celebrities visit the show when they appear as guests in Springfield, interacting with the regular cast, the town's response is consistently disproportionate. Springfield doesn't just appreciate celebrities. It is fascinated by them to a degree that borders on pathological. Famous people are treated as though their presence in Springfield resolves something, answers something, fills some gap in the town's sense of itself. This is interesting in the context of everything we've been discussing about what Springfield is. A community that has been systematically deprived of a clear and honest sense of its own situation, whose residents' cognitive function has been compromised, whose collective memory is managed by social agreement, whose primary relationship to truth is denial, is a community with a significant need for external validation. For some kind of signal from outside the loop that what's happening inside the loop has value, that the people inside it matter, that their lives, constrained and contaminated and deliberately kept small as those lives may be, are worth something to a larger world. Celebrity provides a version of that signal. A famous person choosing to be in Springfield, choosing to interact with the residents, choosing to acknowledge the existence of this town that can't locate itself on a map is, for a community with Springfield's specific psychological needs, something close to confirmation that the community exists, that it matters, that it is real in some way that the ordinary evidence of daily life hasn't been able to make fully convincing. And under the coma theory, this makes even more sense. Homer's dreaming brain, absorbing voices and names and cultural signals from the hospital environment, incorporates celebrities into the dream as a kind of aspirational gesture. The dream populates Springfield with people who are important in the outside world. People whose presence in the dream elevates the dream, makes the dream feel like something more than what it is. One man's private world, kept running at enormous psychological cost, in a hospital room that he can't access and can't change and can't leave. The celebrity appearances are the dream's attempt to make itself feel significant, to tell itself that it matters, that the people in it are worth the attention of the world beyond the fog. The sound of Springfield. Here's something you might not have consciously noticed but has been shaping your experience of the show for as long as you've been watching it. Springfield has a specific sonic character. The show's audio design, the background sounds, the ambient noise, the specific sonic texture of different locations in Springfield has been remarkably consistent across the show's entire run. The hum of the power plant in establishing shots, the specific crowd noise of Moe's Tavern, the mechanical sounds of the nuclear facility, the specific way Springfield sounds at night, which is different from the way it sounds during the day. These sounds have been present from the beginning. They've seeped into the viewing experience so gradually and so completely that most viewers stopped consciously registering them long ago. They're just there. They're part of Springfield. They're part of what makes Springfield feel like itself rather than a generic animation backdrop. But if the radiation theory is correct, if the power plant has been leaking contamination into every corner of Springfield's environment for decades, then the specific sonic character of Springfield is partly the sound of the contamination, the hum of the plant that underlies every outdoor scene, the specific quality of the air that comes through and how sound behaves in Springfield's outdoor spaces. The sound of a town that has been living in proximity to a nuclear facility for so long that the facility's presence is simply background. And if the coma theory is correct, that sonic character is part of Homer's dream. The specific sounds of Springfield are the sounds Homer's unconscious mind has reconstructed from memory. The plant hum, the bar noise, the school sounds, the evening quality of the neighborhood, all of it assembled from acoustic memories frozen at April 1993, reproduced in the dream with whatever fidelity Homer's dreaming mind can maintain. There is something specific and persistent about the sound of Springfield, something that communicates, below the level of conscious attention, exactly what Springfield is. A place where certain things are always in the background, a place where the hum never quite goes away. The relationship between Homer and Bart. The relationship between Homer and Bart is the show's central comedy engine. Homer strangling Bart for whatever Bart has done is the recurring physical gag that appears more often than almost any other repeated element in the show's 36-year run. It's a joke. It's always a joke. Homer's hands go around Bart's neck, Bart's eyes bug out, the strangulation continues for a moment, and then the scene moves on and neither party seems to have sustained any lasting damage from the exchange. But hold the image for a moment. Set the comedy aside. Look at what the image actually shows. A father physically attacking his son. A child being harmed by the person most responsible for protecting him. The relationship that should provide the most reliable safety, the most consistent sanctuary, the most fundamental security, that relationship depicted repeatedly as one of casual violence. The show is careful to keep the strangulation in the register of comedy. Homer's expression during the act is not rage. It is the expression of someone performing a familiar, well-practiced response to a familiar, well-practiced stimulus. It reads as habit rather than anger. Bart's expression suggests discomfort but not terror. The strangulation ends and they proceed to whatever comes next. It doesn't carry the emotional weight of actual violence. And yet, the coma theory offers a specific reading of this recurring image that changes how it sits. In Homer's dream, Homer's relationship with Bart is the most complicated thing he's carrying. Bart was the one who, directly and through his April Fool's escalation, was responsible for the chain of events that ended with Homer in a coma. The beer can shaker, the explosion, the hospital, the vending machine. All of it traces back to Bart's escalating prank. Homer doesn't know this in the dream. Or rather, the dream doesn't present it as something Homer knows and is processing. The Bart in the dream is the son Homer loves, mischievous and infuriating and beloved. But the dream keeps producing this specific physical dynamic between them. Homer's hands on Bart's neck, Homer's aggression directed at the person, in some deep unconscious accounting, most responsible for what happened. The strangulation is both comedy and symptom, and the fact that it never goes away, that it has persisted as a recurring element for 36 years, in hundreds of episodes, performed on the couch and in the kitchen and in the car, and in every context the show can generate, suggests that whatever it is serving in the structure of the show, it isn't going to be resolved. Because if it were resolved, if Homer and Bart achieved a different kind of relationship, a a more fully peaceful one, it might disrupt the internal equilibrium that the dream requires to keep running. The weight Marge carries. We've talked about Homer, about Lisa, about Bart, about Maggie, about Burns. Let's spend some time with Marge. Marge Simpson is the most under-theorized member of the Simpson family. The fan theories cluster heavily around Homer and Burns and the shooting mystery. Lisa gets considered as the show's moral center. Maggie gets the genius baby analysis. But Marge, who is in many ways the most functionally competent member of the entire household, gets discussed relatively rarely in the theoretical literature about the show. This is itself interesting. Marge is the person who holds everything together. She is the show's load-bearing character, the structural support without which the entire family would collapse in ways that Homer, in his fog, would not even be able to fully register as a collapse. She manages the household, the children's developmental needs, Homer's emotional crises, the family's finances in the context of Homer's erratic income and impulsive spending, the social relationships that keep the family connected to the community. She does all of this continuously, without recognition proportional to its difficulty, and without ever quite reaching the breaking point that would end the family's functional coherence. The show depicts this with considerable honesty. Marge's patience isn't presented as effortless. There are episodes built around what happens when the weight becomes temporarily too much, when the strain shows, when Marge's own needs come into view in ways the family isn't equipped to adequately address. These are among the show's most specifically observed episodes, the ones that feel most like a writer or a room of writers actually paying attention to what it costs to be the person who makes everything work. And yet Marge keeps going. She absorbs the weight and continues. The family stays intact. Under the radiation theory, Marge's constitution, her ability to sustain the household under conditions that would plausibly break a different person, might itself be a function of whatever the contamination has done to the residents of Springfield. Not cognitive impairment, as in Homer's case, but something in the other direction. An enhanced capacity for emotional and domestic labor. A heightened tolerance for the specific stresses that come with maintaining a family in a compromised environment. Under the coma theory, Marge is the dream's anchor. She is the version of Marge that Homer's dreaming mind has preserved with the greatest fidelity, because she is the person Homer most needed to hold on to. His unconscious mind has reproduced her with the specific quality of someone who is clung to. She is steady in the dream because Homer's need for her steadiness is the most fundamental emotional content the dream is built around. His wife. The person he can't lose. The person the dream exists, at its deepest level, to preserve. Under the collective denial theory, Marge is the community's model for how to maintain the fiction. She performs the function of normalcy in a household that is not normal, in a town that is not normal, with a consistency that demonstrates how comprehensively the social fiction can be internalized. She doesn't maintain the household out of denial. She's more perceptive than Homer, more aware of what the environment is, more capable of seeing the problems. She maintains it because the alternative is a collapse that would harm people she loves. She has made the calculation that Springfield makes collectively. The lie is preferable to the chaos that confronting the truth would produce. Marge is Springfield's survival mechanism made flesh. She is the reason the family exists at the end of each episode to begin the next one. And she carries that weight, episode after episode, for 36 years, without anybody in the show fully articulating how much that is. What the opening credits have always been telling you. The opening credits of The Simpsons are among the most recognizable sequences in television history. The distinctive Danny Elfman theme, the clouds parting to reveal the Springfield title card, the sequence of each family member's day, leading to the simultaneous arrival at the couch. The couch gag, which changes every episode and has become its own art form within the show. Most people experience the opening credits as a warm-up, the familiar routine before the episode begins. The musical signal that the show is starting, the visual pattern that confirms which show it is, the couch gag as the variable element that provides something new within a completely familiar structure. But the opening credits are also, if you look at them as a sequence with internal logic, a miniature version of everything the show is about. Homer, at the plant, is working next to the reactor. He hides something radioactive in his shirt, the donut he was about to eat, or a glowing piece of material, depending on which version of the opening plays and takes it home. He drives home through Springfield. The sequence shows Springfield from the perspective of someone passing through it. The power plant dominant in the background, the town spread out around and below it. Bart is at school, writing something on the chalkboard. The specific text changes episode to episode. The chalkboard gag, another variable element within a fixed structure. Whatever he's writing, it's something his teacher presumably required him to write repeatedly as punishment. Bart is being disciplined, in the opening credits, for something. The specific thing varies. The fact of the discipline doesn't. Lisa is in the school band. She plays a saxophone solo that goes further than the arranged music, further than the director wants, further than the context allows for. She is, in the opening credits, doing something excellent that the available structure isn't big enough to contain. The director cuts her off. She continues playing as she walks down the hall. The music goes where she takes it, regardless of the official end of band practice. Marge is at the grocery store. She passes through the checkout with Maggie, who gets scanned by the barcode reader along with the groceries. The scanner gives her a price. The price is a joke, the exact amount that Maggie Simpson costs. In whatever version of that joke the specific opening is running, she is assigned a value. She is passed through a system that doesn't know what category to put her in and settles for pricing her. They all arrive at the house simultaneously. They all pile onto the couch at the same moment. The couch gag plays, which is the variable chaos element. The opening's acknowledgement that every episode is going to produce something different from the stable family arrangement that the credits establish as the baseline. Homer, at the end of it all, is home. On the couch, with his family. That's the opening. That's the miniature version of the show's thesis. Homer takes something contaminated from work and brings it home. Lisa plays music that's too big for the available space. Bart is being repeatedly punished for something. Marge handles logistics. Maggie gets priced and filed. And they all arrive, simultaneously, at the couch. The chaos of the specific episode will follow. Whatever disaster the plot is going to produce, whatever impossible event is going to unfold, whatever catastrophe will need to be survived, all of it is still ahead. The opening credits are the moment before, the moment of stability, the moment when the family is intact and the couch is available and Homer is home. The show keeps returning us to that moment. Every episode, after everything that happened in the previous one, the opening credits play and we're back there. Homer is at work taking something radioactive from the reactor. Lisa's saxophone is too good for the available space. Bart is being disciplined. Marge is at the store. Maggie is being priced. And they all come home. They always come home. The question of consciousness in Springfield. Let's ask the most fundamental question the theories raise, stated as plainly as possible. Is anyone in Springfield fully conscious? By fully conscious, let's mean aware of their situation, capable of making choices that reflect genuine understanding of the circumstances in which those choices are made, able to see the system they're inside and decide deliberately how to respond to it. Homer, almost certainly not. Radiation, crayon, childhood trauma, occupational hazard, decades of accumulated cognitive erosion. Homer's consciousness is compromised in several overlapping ways, each reinforcing the others. He experiences his life. He doesn't, in any robust sense, understand it. The townspeople, the collective denial mechanism suggests that whatever their individual cognitive capacities might be, their social consciousness, their shared understanding of Springfield's situation is actively managed to prevent the full picture from coming together. Burns, possibly. Burns has resources, medical support, and an intelligence that appears unimpaired relative to everything around him. He may see Springfield more clearly than anyone else in it. The question of whether this constitutes full consciousness depends on whether you think understanding and exploitation are compatible with awareness, or whether true awareness produces something more like responsibility. Burns understands. He exploits. Whether he is conscious in the sense of being genuinely awake to the meaning of what he's doing is a question the show doesn't resolve. Lisa, the closest thing to full consciousness in Springfield. She sees clearly. She processes accurately. She understands her situation with a precision that nobody else in her household comes close to matching. But understanding your situation without the capacity to change it is its own kind of trap. Lisa is conscious. Lisa is 8 years old. The gap between what she sees and what she can do about it is the width of everything the show has been building for 36 years. And Maggie, of course. Maggie watching. Maggie accumulating. Maggie making decisions in a mind nobody fully accounts for. Maybe the answer to the question is that nobody in Springfield is fully conscious except the two people who can't act on it. The 8-year-old who is too young to have power and the 1-year-old who has chosen silence as her strategy. And the rest of Springfield moves through its days with the specific kind of partial awareness that the system produces and requires awake enough to function, compromised enough to comply. Final thoughts on what Springfield teaches us. Springfield is not a prediction. It's a portrait. It has always been a portrait of the specific way that ordinary people sustain ordinary life in ordinary places, even when the conditions of that life are far from ordinary. Even when the water is wrong and the air is wrong and the powerful man at the center of everything is wrong, in ways that most people sense but cannot quite name and therefore cannot quite address, the portrait is rendered in yellow, in 4 fingers, in a floating timeline, and a forgotten history, and a town that can't find itself on a map. But the thing being portrayed is real. It's recognizable to anyone who has ever lived in a community that depends on something harmful for its survival. To anyone who has ever watched a capable person get crushed by an environment that didn't know what to do with their capabilities. To anyone who has ever loved something they couldn't keep and tried to preserve it in whatever form was available. Homer's dream, if it is a dream, is the dream version of what we all do when we try to hold on to things. We freeze the image, we run the loop, we keep the children young in our memories, or in our imaginations, or in the shows we watch because they never change. We tell ourselves the story again, because the story is the best way we have of being with the people and the places that time is pulling away from us. Springfield will be there tomorrow, exactly the way it was today. The tire fire burning, the plant humming, Marge in the kitchen, Lisa playing saxophone, Bart planning whatever he's planning, Homer making it home just in time. Always just in time. That's the show. That's all of it. 36 years, 800 episodes. Every theory and every mystery and every question we've been sitting with tonight, reduced to its simplest and truest form. A man who wants to be home, who always, in the end, is. Extended analysis. The Simpsons and American Working Class Identity. The Simpsons premiered in December 1989, at a specific moment in American economic and cultural history. The Reagan years had just ended. The Cold War was about to end. The specific version of the American dream that had organized working-class aspiration for the post-war decades, the idea that a man could support a family on a single income, own a house, take vacations, send his kids to public school and trust that those kids would have access to opportunities comparable to what he'd had, was beginning to show the cracks that would widen significantly over the following decades. Homer Simpson is the avatar of that specific American working-class position. He works a single job, he owns a house, he has 3 children. He has a wife who, in the early seasons, does not work outside the home. He goes to work, comes home, watches television, drinks beer, loves his family in his imperfect and sometimes frustrating way, and generally manages to keep the household together despite the ongoing chaos his choices and limitations produce. He is not wealthy. He is not educated beyond what Springfield High School provided. He is not ambitious in any sustained or systematic way. He is a man who found a job and a house and a family, and has organized his life around maintaining all 3 without particularly questioning whether the job is good or the house is in a good location or the family could be better supported by different choices. He is, in other words, exactly the kind of person that the American working-class mythology was built for. The person the mythology was designed to describe and to reassure. The person who was told that the job, the house, the family, the beer on the couch after work was enough, that this was the achievement, that this was what the dream looked like when it worked. The show spends 36 years examining what it costs to sustain that mythology against the evidence that the evidence is providing. The job is at a nuclear facility that's poisoning the town. The house is in a contamination zone. The family is showing signs of the specific distortions that the contaminated environment produces. The dream is real in the sense that Homer loves it, but the conditions underlying it are not what the mythology promised they would be. This is not a subtle observation once you see it, but it's embedded in the comedy so completely, normalized so thoroughly by the show's own style and tone, that it's easy to experience as atmosphere rather than argument. The radiation theory is, in this reading, not just a conspiracy theory about a cartoon show. It's the show's sustained, embedded argument about what the American working-class experience has actually looked like, beneath the mythology, for the people living inside it. Homer is not just a funny character. Homer is a portrait of someone who has been told that what he has is the good life, in a context where having the good life requires not looking too closely at what makes it possible. He is the person the system needs him to be, the person who keeps working, who doesn't ask too many questions, who absorbs the damage and comes home and sits on the couch, who loves his family, genuinely and without reservation, in a house on a street in a town that is slowly poisoning him, that he cannot afford to question, because questioning it would mean losing the life the mythology told him was the achievement. The show loves Homer. That's not in question. The comedy comes from love. The heartfelt moments come from love. The whole structure of the show is built around genuine affection for this specific man in his specific situation. But the love doesn't prevent the show from showing you, episode after episode, season after season, what the situation actually is, what Homer is actually living inside, what the working-class mythology has actually produced for the people who believed in it most completely. Springfield is what happens when the mythology meets the reality, and nobody in the mythology can quite bring themselves to look at the reality directly, because looking directly would mean revising the myth. And the myth is all they have. The role of education in Springfield. Springfield has an elementary school, a high school, and what appears to be a community college that various characters have attended at various points in the show's run. The educational system in Springfield is, across the board, depicted as deeply inadequate to the needs of its students. Springfield Elementary is chronically underfunded. Its administration is led by the principal we now know is actually named Armin Tamzarian, whose complicated personal history we've already explored. Its teaching staff includes several characters who are clearly dedicated to their students and clearly constrained by the institutional limitations around them. The school has lost programs repeatedly: the music program that inspired Tito Puente's grudge against Burns, sports programs, extracurricular activities that disappear when the budget gets cut again. The students who attend Springfield Elementary include Lisa Simpson, who is by any measure one of the most intellectually gifted children ever to pass through those doors, and who is consistently underserved by an institution that doesn't have the resources, the curriculum, or in some cases the understanding to give her what her abilities would allow her to reach. And Bart Simpson, whose specific learning style and specific needs are consistently mismatched with what the school is able to provide, with the predictable result that he is perpetually classified as a problem rather than as a person whose needs aren't being met. The education system in Springfield doesn't fail its students through malice. It fails them through underfunding, through the prioritization of institutional survival over educational outcome, through the accumulated effects of a community where the primary economic actor has spent decades minimizing its tax contribution through every available mechanism, leaving the public institutions that depend on tax revenue chronically resource-deprived. This is recognizable. This is not a Springfield-specific phenomenon. This is the situation of public education in communities where the largest employer has the political influence and the financial resources to minimize its local tax liability, leaving schools and other public services to operate on whatever remains. The Simpsons isn't depicting something exotic when it shows you Springfield Elementary's budget problems. It's depicting something ordinary, something that happens in real communities all the time, in versions that are less visually dramatic than Burns stealing an oil well, but functionally quite similar in their effects. The specific cruelty of Lisa's situation in this context is that she has the intelligence to see exactly what's happening around her, the sensitivity to feel exactly how wrong it is, and essentially zero power to change any of it from her position as an 8-year-old student in an underfunded elementary school in an economically captured community. She is the most capable student Springfield Elementary has probably ever had, and Springfield Elementary, in its resource-deprived and institutionally constrained state, gives her almost nothing proportional to that capability. She reads, she plays saxophone, she argues, she tries. And the institution that should be the place where her potential gets genuinely developed is instead another version of the system that produced the contamination and the tire fire and everything else in Springfield that should have been addressed and wasn't. Springfield and the myth of the reset button. Every episode of The Simpsons ends in roughly the same place. The crisis of the episode is resolved, or at least contained. The family is intact. The immediate problem has been handled in some way. And by the following episode, whatever happened in the previous one has been absorbed back into Springfield's baseline condition without lasting trace. This reset is the show's most debated structural feature. Critics call it lazy writing. Defenders call it a fundamental property of the format. The coma theory calls it a dreaming brain restarting between cycles. The radiation theory calls it neurological damage, preventing the storage of episodic memory at the community level. The collective denial theory calls it a vote. But there's another way to think about the reset, one that's less theoretical and more observational. The reset isn't something the show does between episodes. It's something the show shows you happening within episodes all the time in miniature. Homer causes a disaster. The disaster unfolds. Homer participates in resolving the disaster through some combination of luck, love, and the specific logic of the episode's plot. The resolution is achieved. And then Homer goes home, sits on the couch, and the next morning begins in roughly the same conditions the previous morning began in. This is not a failure of consequence. This is a portrait of how life actually works for most people in most circumstances. Most disasters, in real human lives, don't permanently alter the conditions of life. They are survived, and life continues. The marriage survives the argument, the job survives the mistake, the family survives the crisis. And the morning after the worst thing that happened last month begins in roughly the same conditions that the morning before it began in. The reset isn't denying consequence. It's depicting resilience. The specific, undramatic, unglamorous resilience of people who absorb what happens to them and continue, who maintain the household and the relationship and the job and the neighborhood despite the ongoing series of disasters that life in their specific circumstances produces. Homer's resilience is the resilience of someone who has very little structural capacity to protect himself from what happens to him, and who therefore has to keep absorbing it and recovering. His recovery isn't a denial of the damage. It's evidence of it. The man who gets back up from everything that knocks him down isn't getting back up because nothing knocks him down. He's getting back up because getting back up is the only option available to him. That's the reset, not lazy writing, not cartoon convention. The actual texture of working-class life in a system that produces ongoing damage to the people inside it and provides them with insufficient protection from that damage, requiring them to develop the specific resilience that comes from having no alternative. The Secret Life of Springfield at Night. Let's think for a moment about Springfield after dark. The show is mostly set during daylight hours, during the school day and the workday and the family evening. But Springfield at night, in the establishing shots, in the scenes set after everyone has gone to bed, in the occasional episode that ventures into the late-night hours, has a specific quality that's different from the daytime version of the town. Burns's weekly treatment for one thing happens at night. He emerges from his appointment in that dazed, glowing state and walks home through the forest in the dark. Whatever he's doing in those nighttime hours, whatever the treatment consists of, it happens in a context that the rest of Springfield isn't usually awake to see. Homer's late-night ventures, the episodes set after midnight, the ones where he sneaks out or stays up or ends up somewhere he shouldn't be, at hours when most of the town is asleep, have a different texture than the daytime episodes. The town feels emptier. The systems that maintain Springfield's daytime normalcy are less actively engaged. Things that would be impossible to do during the day become possible in the night version of Springfield, because the social mechanisms of observation and correction are temporarily suspended. The Quick E-Mart is open 24 hours. Apu is there. He has, within the canonical world of Springfield, worked shifts of impossible length without sleep. The Quick E-Mart is Springfield's nighttime institution, the one place that maintains the day's supply chain functions through the hours when the rest of the town's commercial life is dark. There's a specific anxiety embedded in the nighttime version of Springfield that the daytime version keeps covered. The anxiety of what exists when the normalcy drops away. What happens in the plant during the overnight shift? What the town's environmental contamination looks like without the social covering of daily life, providing context and framework and the comfortable distraction of ordinary activity. Springfield at night is Springfield without its maintenance mechanism, without the shared routines and the collective agreement to maintain the daytime version of the fiction. The reality that the daytime carefully manages becomes slightly more visible. Burns glows in it. Homer wanders through it in his sleep and in his coma. The tire fire burns on without needing observation. The plant hums regardless of whether anyone is awake to hear it. Springfield at night is Springfield as it actually is, when the performed normalcy has gone to bed. The children of Springfield and what they become. The show has, across its run, offered glimpses of Springfield's children as adults. The future episodes, Lisa's Wedding, Bart to the Future, and several Treehouse of Horror speculations sketch out possible adult versions of characters we've watched as children for decades. What's striking about these visions, across the ones the show has produced, is how closely the adult versions of Springfield's children resemble the children themselves. Lisa grown up is still Lisa, still brilliant, still somewhat isolated, still reaching for something her immediate environment doesn't quite offer. Bart grown up is still Bart, still impulsive, still charismatic, still making choices that produce consequences he didn't quite anticipate. The characters who emerge from Springfield haven't been fundamentally transformed by whatever happened to them between childhood and adulthood. They're enlarged versions of themselves. The core traits that define them at 8 and 10 and 1 have been expanded, not changed. This could be read as a creative limitation, as the writers being unable to imagine their characters as genuinely different people when they grow up. But it could also be read as the show's most honest observation about what Springfield does to the people who grow up in it. Springfield produces adults who are larger versions of the children they were. The exposure doesn't transform people in ways that open new possibilities. It locks them in. The irradiated environment, the compromised institutions, the economic dependency, the collective denial, the accumulated weight of all the things Springfield doesn't adequately provide for its residents. All of it produces adults who are more deeply themselves, but not differently themselves. Adults who have absorbed the full weight of Springfield's conditions and emerged as permanent, fixed versions of what they were at the beginning. Lisa is still reaching for something better. She will always be reaching for something better. Bart is still directionless fire, pointed at whatever is immediately in front of him. He will always be that, because Springfield doesn't produce the conditions for genuine transformation. It produces the conditions for intensification, for becoming more completely what you already are, without the capacity to become something different. The children of Springfield grow up to be the adults of Springfield, and the adults of Springfield are the children of Springfield, grown larger and more weathered but not fundamentally changed. The loop continues, the generations cycle through, and Springfield persists. On finishing here. We've been in Springfield for a long time tonight. We've traced the invisible lines that connect the cooling tower to the fish, to the water, to the bodies, to the brains of the people who live downwind. We've sat with Homer in his hospital room and wondered whether he ever came back. We've looked at the ballistics of a shooting that was supposedly solved and found the evidence considerably less definitive than the verdict. We've followed a man's extraordinary age across a century and found the infrastructure of his survival. We've watched a town vote to make truth illegal and understood, for the first time, why everything resets. We've counted Maggie's silences. We've listened to Lisa's saxophone drifting through the walls. We've followed Mona's trail through the underground and across 2 decades and into a quiet room where a mother and son said what they needed to say after 27 years of not being able to say anything. We've searched for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere. We've stared at the floating timeline until it stared back. We've thought about Hans Moleman and Ned Flanders and what they tell us about a world where goodness isn't rewarded and ordinary people keep dying and coming back, and nobody talks about either of those things. And now, as the theories settle and the night gets quiet and the edges of consciousness start to soften the way they do when sleep is near, the question isn't which theory is right. The question is what all of them together are pointing toward. A show about a family that loves each other in a world that makes loving each other difficult. A show about a community that sustains itself through denial in ways that are both necessary and damaging. A show about what people preserve when they can't preserve everything, which specific things they choose to hold on to, and which specific things they let the fog cover. A show about a man who may or may not have woken up from a hospital bed in April 1993, dreaming a family into permanent being because the alternative was too dark to contemplate. Maybe all of it. Maybe the radiation is real, and the coma is real, and the denial is real, and Maggie's silence is a strategy, and Burns really is too expensive to die, and Springfield really can't be located because location would mean accountability. Maybe the show has been doing all of these things simultaneously, in a work of sustained and layered complexity that we've been calling comedy because it makes us laugh, without fully accounting for how much else it does underneath the laughter. Or maybe it's simpler than all of that. Maybe it's just a family. Just a family doing its best in difficult circumstances. Making a mess of things and recovering from the mess and making another mess and recovering again. Coming home at the end of each day, however chaotic the day was, sitting down together on the couch, not because the couch is safe, Not because the house is safe, or the town, or the water, or the air, but because the family is there, and the family is the thing worth sitting down for. Homer makes it home. He always makes it home. The couch is always waiting. Good night, Springfield. Good night. Bonus section. The lesser-known theories worth knowing. We've spent most of tonight on the show's biggest and most elaborately supported theories, but the world of Simpsons theorizing goes considerably further than the major ones, and some of the smaller, less discussed theories deserve attention before we close. Not because they're necessarily as well supported as the ones we've explored, but because they illuminate corners of Springfield that the bigger theories don't quite reach. The theory that Springfield has always had two timelines. One observation that gets made in fan communities but rarely developed fully: The Simpsons seems to operate, at various points in its run, with contradictory versions of events that can't be reconciled within a single continuous timeline. Homer's backstory with Marge changes. His relationship with his parents shifts in ways that aren't always explainable by the floating timeline's revision of their ages. Certain specific events that were established as facts in early seasons appear to have been revised or quietly contradicted by later seasons without explicit acknowledgement. The usual explanation is continuity error, the natural consequence of a writing staff that has turned over many times across 36 seasons, producing inevitable inconsistencies that nobody has the structural incentive to fully track and correct. But what if the inconsistencies aren't errors? What if they're the accurate record of a show that has always been depicting two versions of Springfield simultaneously, a version from before the coma, and a version from inside the dream without ever explicitly labeling which is which? Under this reading, the continuity contradictions aren't failures of consistency, they're the seams between the two versions. The places where the pre-coma memory and the post-coma dream produce different versions of the same past, and the show doesn't resolve them because the show has never decided which version is the real one, because within the logic of the theory, neither version is unambiguously real. The contradictions are the theory's evidence, not its weakness. The theory that Marge has known about the coma. This one is smaller and more specific, but it's interesting. If Homer is in a coma, Marge knows. She was there when the vending machine fell. She has presumably been at his bedside in whatever capacity the years allow. The Marge in the dream version of his wife, is generated by Homer's unconscious mind from his memory of her. She behaves the way Homer believes Marge would behave, which is largely consistent with how she actually does behave, because Homer's understanding of Marge is accurate enough that the simulation is convincing. But there are moments in the show where Marge seems to look directly at the camera, moments where her awareness seems to extend slightly past the fourth wall, past the edge of the dream, past the comfortable fiction. Moments where she seems to know something she shouldn't, to see something the dream shouldn't be allowing her to see. These moments are usually played as comedy Marge noticing something absurd about her situation and commenting on it, and that's how they function in the episode. But in the context of the coma theory, they read slightly differently. They read as the dream's own awareness of itself briefly surfacing through the character Homer's unconscious mind has built to represent the person he loves most. The dream Marge knows in those moments that she's a dream, and the way Homer's mind has constructed her, the specific combination of patience and perception and quiet competence that defines her, is the mind's way of building a Marge who could hold the dream together even from the inside. The theory that Springfield exists in a pocket of time. Here's one that the radiation theory and the coma theory both point toward, but neither quite names directly. What if Springfield doesn't just operate under unusual rules? What if Springfield operates under a fundamentally different relationship to time itself? The town can't be located in space. What if it also can't be located in time? What if Springfield occupies a temporal position that is, like its geographic position, undefined, existing in a kind of temporal pocket where the usual relationship between past and present and future doesn't apply in the ways it applies everywhere else? The floating timeline is usually understood as a narrative device. Characters don't age because aging would create story problems. But what if the floating timeline is a property of Springfield itself? What if the town, whether through radiation or through Homer's dream, or through some combination of causes that the show has never explicitly named, exists in a genuine state of temporal suspension? Under this reading, the characters don't age because Springfield doesn't age. The town doesn't change in fundamental ways, because the town exists in a temporal pocket that prevents the normal processes of change from fully taking effect. Time passes in Springfield, but it passes differently. Events happen. Consequences occur. But the passage of time doesn't produce the usual accumulation of irreversible change. The question this raises, is the temporal pocket permanent? Or is there a version of Springfield where the pocket eventually collapses? Where the accumulated time that hasn't been processed starts to arrive all at once? If the coma theory is right, the answer might be that the collapse happens when Homer wakes up, or when Homer doesn't. That the temporal pocket is sustained by the dream, and its end is the dream's end. Which would mean that the moment the show ends, the very last episode, whenever it eventually airs, might be, within the internal logic of the theory, the moment the dream finally stops, and everything that's been frozen starts, at last, to move. The theory that Bart has been the architect of everything. We've talked about Burns as the central figure in the conspiracy that shaped Homer's life, but here's a smaller, weirder theory that occasionally surfaces in fan discussions. What if Bart is the one who has, consciously or unconsciously, been shaping the events of the show from the beginning? Bart caused the coma, that's established. His April Fool's escalation produced the beer can explosion that sent Homer to the hospital. And if the coma theory is right, Bart is, in that sense, the author of every episode that followed the unwitting creator of the dream that replaced his father's waking life. But look at other things Bart has done across the show's run. He has, with some regularity, done things that significantly altered the trajectory of Springfield's community life. He has exposed corruption. He has revealed secrets. He has, in his chaotic and directionless way, occasionally punctured the comfortable lies that Springfield maintains. Not through strategy. Bart doesn't operate through strategy, at least not the kind that requires sustained planning. He operates through impulse and energy and the specific kind of luck that comes to people who move through the world with enough momentum that things happen around them. But the results of his actions, across the show's run, include a disproportionate number of events that produced real consequences, real exposure of things that Springfield would have preferred to keep covered, real disruptions of the systems that maintain the town's comfortable fictions. Homer dreams of an idealized Springfield. Burns controls the real one. Bart keeps accidentally breaking things in ways that reveal what's underneath. He's not a hero, he's not a strategist, but he's the one who keeps putting his hand in the machinery and pulling something out, and what comes out is often more true than what was visible on the surface. He caused the coma. Maybe everything that happened after the coma, all the elaborate dream content, all the impossible adventures, is Bart's gift to his father. An unconscious, unintended, unlikely gift from a kid who didn't mean to do what he did and can't fully understand what it produced, but who keeps showing up in the dream doing exactly the things that keep the dream going. Homer strangling Bart in the dream isn't just a recurring joke. It's the dream working through something that Homer can't fully articulate. Affection so complicated by what happened that it keeps expressing itself in the only physical vocabulary available. And Bart keeps coming back, keeps showing up, keeps being present in the dream, episode after episode, because whatever the strangulation is, he can take it. Because he always could. The theory about what Season 1 actually is. This one is speculative in a way the others aren't, and it's worth flagging that clearly. But it's interesting enough to mention. Season 1 of The Simpsons is visually and tonally different from every season that followed it. The animation is rougher, the characters' appearances are less refined. Homer looks more distorted, more primitive, less like the Homer that audiences think of when they think of the show. The tone is slightly off. The humor is present, but the specific chemistry of the show hadn't quite settled. The standard explanation is simply that Season 1 was a first season, and first seasons of shows are typically rough as the creative team finds its footing. This is almost certainly true. The technical and creative development that occurred between Season 1 and Season 2 is real and significant. But the coma theory invites a different gloss. If Homer is in a coma from Season 4 onward, then Seasons 1 through 3 are the period when Homer was actually awake. They're real as the show gets. And Season 1, with its rougher edges and its slightly wrong character designs and its imprecisely calibrated tone, might be the show's most accurate depiction of Springfield, because it's the depiction created before Homer's dreaming mind had fully refined its internal simulation. By Season 3, the dream has learned to simulate more accurately. The character designs are more polished. The tone is more precisely calibrated. The world of Springfield looks more like the world of Springfield is supposed to look. But Season 1, with all its rough edges, might be the truest version. The version before the refinement. The version closest to what Homer's memory actually contained before the dream had enough time to smooth and polish it into something more convincingly consistent. The archive and the loop. Why we keep returning. There's a piece of infrastructure that didn't exist when The Simpsons began, and that has fundamentally changed the relationship between the show and its audience. The archive. The full availability of every episode, every clip, every moment from 36 years of the show's run. When The Simpsons premiered in 1989, episodes aired once, maybe twice, in reruns. If you missed an episode, it was gone. If you wanted to catch a reference you'd heard about, you had to hope it got rerun eventually. The show existed in real time, in the present tense, and the past episodes receded into memory the way real past experiences do. Now everything is available. Every episode is on a streaming service. Every clip is on YouTube. Every moment that anyone wants to reference can be pulled up immediately and verified. The show's 36-year archive is accessible in its entirety, simultaneously, to anyone who wants to look. This has changed what The Simpsons means. It has turned a show that aired in real time into an object, something you can hold and examine from multiple angles, something that can be searched and cross-referenced and studied. The fan theories became more elaborately evidenced when it became possible to actually pull up every episode to verify specific details. The prediction phenomenon intensified when the archive made it easy to find the episode from 1995 that rhymed with a 2019 headline. But the archive has also changed something subtler about the relationship. When every episode is available simultaneously, the show stops being a timeline and becomes a space. You don't progress through The Simpsons from season 1 to the current season. You move through it. You revisit favorite episodes. You jump to the one that felt relevant to something that happened today. You access the past of the show with a freedom that mirrors, in a curious way, the freedom of dreams. The coma, in this reading, might be less of a metaphor for Homer's specific unconscious state and more of a metaphor for the audience's relationship to the show. We don't experience The Simpsons in strict chronological sequence anymore. We experience it the way memory works associatively, thematically, jumping between points without regard for their original sequence. We pull up the episode we need when we need it. We revisit things that were meaningful at different points in our lives. We hold the whole show in a kind of permanent present tense. The floating timeline isn't just Springfield's relationship to time. It's ours now too. We can always go back to season 3. We can always revisit the episode from 1995. The archive makes the show's past as immediately accessible as its present. The loop that Homer's dream runs is one we can enter and exit whenever we want, which might be why we keep coming back. Not because we haven't finished the show, there's always more to watch, but because we want to be back inside the specific feeling the show produces. The specific combination of warmth and melancholy and familiarity and surprise that comes from spending time in a place that feels known and permanent, with characters who don't age and a world that always resets and a family that always ends up on the couch. The archive gave us something we didn't know we wanted until it became available. Springfield as a permanent present tense, a place we can return to. A couch that's always available. Homer always makes it home. And so do we, every time we press play. Estimated final word count exceeds 40,000 words. Runtime at 140 words per minute narration pace, approximately 4.75 to 5.5 hours of audio content. Suitable for 11 Labs voiceover generation. Written for sleep listening retention. Closing meditation. Springfield After Dark. The show never ends at midnight. It ends when the credits roll, which is usually around the 22-minute mark, and whatever time that is in the real world depends on what day it is and what channel you're watching it on, and what era of television you're living in. But Springfield, the town itself, persists after the credits. The lights of the power plant stay on. The tire fire burns. The quick E-Mart stays open with a poo at the register. The Simpson house sits quiet on Evergreen Terrace. The television off now, the couch empty, the family asleep. Homer is asleep. Whatever his sleep means within the theories we've explored, whether it's the ordinary sleep of an ordinary man at the end of an ordinary day, or whether it's a dream inside a coma that loops back into itself, the dreamer, dreaming that he's sleeping, he's at rest, his family is safe, the house is standing. Marge is asleep beside him. She held everything together again today. She'll hold it together again tomorrow. She has been holding it together for 36 years and the thread hasn't broken yet, which is remarkable when you consider everything that has pulled at it. Bart is asleep and probably planning something. Even in sleep, the energy doesn't fully stop, it just runs quieter. Whatever he's going to do tomorrow, the preliminary version of it is probably already in motion. Lisa is asleep with a book nearby. She read until she couldn't anymore, the way she always does, taking in the world through whatever the library or the bookshelf provided, trying to understand something she doesn't quite understand yet, which is how she always goes to sleep. And Maggie is asleep in her crib, eyes closed, pacifier in place, enormous mind at whatever rest an enormous mind at her stage allows. Whatever she's accumulating, whatever she's planning, whatever the silence has been building toward it pauses for a few hours while the night runs its course. This is Springfield at rest. This is what the town looks like when the episode is over and the credits have rolled and the audience has been returned to wherever the audience was before they sat down to watch. The theories don't disappear when the episode ends. The radiation is still in the water, the coma is still running, if it's running, the tire fire is still burning. Burns is still counting down the days to his next treatment, wherever he is in his enormous mansion on the hill above the town. But the family is asleep. And sleep, for whatever it's worth, is the one thing Springfield provides without compromise. Even contaminated, even dreaming, even living in the middle of an environmental catastrophe that the federal government classified as too dangerous to let spread, the family sleeps. The night passes, the morning comes, and the show starts again. This is what we come back for, not the theories, though the theories are real and interesting and worth all the time we've spent on them tonight. Not the mysteries, though the mysteries are genuine and the evidence for them is built into the show's DNA. We come back for the moment before the episode begins, when Springfield is quiet and the family is intact and nothing has gone wrong yet. When Homer is on the couch and Marge is beside him and the kids are where they're supposed to be and the house on Evergreen Terrace is exactly the house it's always been. We come back for the start, for the moment of beginning where everything is possible and nothing is broken yet and the specific combination of people who make up this specific family are in the same room, together, about to face whatever the next 22 minutes will bring. They'll face it the way they always do. Imperfectly, chaotically, with genuine love in the middle of the chaos and genuine resilience underneath the imperfection. They'll make it through. They always make it through. And by the end of the episode, Homer will be home. He is always in the end home. Good night.